afternoon session of the March 14th regular Board of County Commissioners meeting, and welcome to Harris Hall. We have a good agenda this afternoon that's beginning with item 10A, Mr. Mokrahajski and Ms. Pettigrew, County Council. I'll look directly at you, Ms. Pettigrew, for what is 10A report on the fatal crash investigation team. I'll ask you to introduce your panel.
Good afternoon.
Once they arrive.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. Good afternoon. I'd like to invite my colleague, Jim Cheney, up to present the Fatal Crash Investigation Team report, as well as other members of the presenting team.
Good afternoon, Chair Farr, Co-Chair Krieger, Commissioners. And with me today is Cassidy Mills with Public Works Department. So I'll get right into this. I'll start with the right page. So, transportation safety is a significant public health issue, and Lane County is the custodian of over 1,400 miles of road that are under county jurisdiction. And Lane County places a high priority on safety on those roads. The Transportation System Plan that was adopted by the board identifies road safety as a guiding principle and objective, and it has an aspirational goal of eliminating fatalities and severe injury collisions on Lane County roads. Next slide, please. We're here today to present this report to the board on the Fatal Crash Investigation Team, which is a group established by the board in 2017 to implement the board's adoption of the Transportation Safety Action Plan, or TSAP. The TSAP is a data-driven, performance-based plan for targeting resources and strategies where they will have the greatest impact in reducing traffic fatalities. The Fatal Crash Investigation itself, we'll call it the FCIT, includes staff from multiple county departments, the Sheriff's Office, the Public Works Department, and the Public Health Division. It's guided by the Transportation Safety Action Plan and the commitment in the TSAP to follow the national safety strategy called Toward Zero Deaths, which means the goal of eliminating all traffic fatalities on all roads. The FCIT uses an integrated approach to safety, which we call the 5 E's: education, emergency response, engineering actions, and enforcement, all of which are evaluated for equitable outcomes, which is the 5th E, and all with the goal of preventing future crashes. When the FCIT was established, it was a requirement of the board that the team report quarterly to the board, and that is what we're here for today. And with that, I will turn it over to Cassidy Mills to get into the real meat and data of the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Cheney, and thank you, Chair Farr, and the rest of the commissioners. Thank you for your time today. As Mr. Cheney mentioned, my name is Cassidy Mills. I'm on the Transportation Planning Team with Lane County Public Works. Today I'll be talking about the fatal crashes that we experienced on county roads in the year 2022. Up on the screen, you'll see that this map shows the general location of fatal crashes between 2016 and 2020 on Lane County roads. This is not including city streets or state highways. We work closely with the Oregon Department of Transportation and regional partners throughout the county, regardless of roadway jurisdiction. But the role of the FCIT is to review fatal crashes on county roads in order to work towards our goal towards 0 deaths on our roadway. The content of today's presentation focuses on the fatal crashes that occurred on county roads in 2022. This does not provide a full picture of the countywide fatal crashes that occurred last year. However, we rely on the Oregon Department of Transportation's Crash Analysis and Reporting Unit for countywide data. Due to the quality control process in place by ODOT, there is a 2-year delay in the release of crash data. Based on this delay, the FCIT reviews fatal crash data available to us via the Lane County Sheriff's Office annually in order to be responsive to notable trends in location and roadway factors. In 2022, there were 15 fatal crashes that occurred on Lane County-owned roads, resulting in 16 deaths. The majority of the victims, 11, were residents of rural communities or communities outside of the Eugene-Springfield urban growth boundary. 14 of the crashes took place outside of the Eugene-Springfield UGB. Of the 16 fatalities, 14 were driving at the time of the crash, and 2 were passengers. The total sample size is small. However, in our efforts to achieve 0 deaths, the FCIT views any death on our roadways as unacceptable. For additional reference, here are the crash locations in relation to each district. This is the highest number of fatalities to occur on county-owned roads in a single year since 2015. This is particularly notable as it was the 2015 data that prompted Lane County to develop the TSAP, the Transportation Safety Action Plan. That year, Lane County experienced more fatalities than any other county in Oregon and ultimately received state funding to help address this rising crisis. There was a decrease in the years that followed. However, fatal crashes are back on the rise. It's important to note that 2020 may appear to have seen a decrease. However, this is a false drop due to an overall decrease in traffic volumes. The rate of fatalities based on vehicle miles traveled was a jump. There was a notable trend in the identity of the victim in each fatal crash. A disproportionate number of fatal crashes involved males. The average age for male victims is 47, and the average age for females is 41. Driver factors that led to many of the crashes are still unknown, but of the identified factors, speed, impairment, or suicidal inclinations were involved. The role of FCIT is not to look at driver fault, but instead to identify effective preventative measures within our roadways. Most county roads outside of the Eugene-Springfield urban growth boundary have a speed limit of 55 miles per hour. Faster speeds result in increased severity of car crashes. Trends observed in 2022 are consistent with the 10-year data analysis that guided the 2017 TSAP of speed being a contributing factor. Most crashes are happening in full daylight, potentially due to a perception that risks may be lower during the day, and as a result, people may be engaging in more risky driving behavior. A majority of the crashes took place midweek, dispelling some assumptions that crashes typically occur over the weekend. Trends observed in 2022 are consistent with past data analysis that more crashes take place over summer months, or more specifically, June through September. We don't know the financial status of people involved in the crashes, but we did look again at the 2019 census data of median household incomes. As shown on this slide, we mapped the fatal crash locations on Lane County roads from 2016 to 2020, shown in red dots. Then we added the 2019 census data showing population information. The darkest green shading shows census tracts with the lowest median household incomes. For reference, the countywide median household income is $49,000. It's also difficult to see a pattern here as the areas with the greatest wealth, the lightest green shaded areas, still have a lot of red dot fatal crash locations. We also looked at the crash data to see if the people involved in crashes live near the crash locations. Most had addresses close to the crash location, only 2 were from out of state. There is a false perception that crashes are through traffic, and yet the data supports that crashes are occurring near people's residences, and again, may have a perception of increased safety. There were 3 crashes in total involving motorcycles. 85% of the crashes involved in vehicles older than the 2010 airbag standard. There's also a growing national data to suggest that increased vehicle size may play a contributing role to the severity of a crash, specifically when larger vehicles are in a crash involving pedestrians or older, smaller vehicles, which may lack certain safety features. I will now pass it back to Mr. Cheney.
Thank you. Thank you, Cassidy. I mentioned the term Towards Zero Deaths earlier. Towards Zero Deaths, TZD, is a fundamental part of the U.S. Department of Transportation's National Roadway Safety Strategy, following what's called a safe system approach. That approach is an integrated path that's designed to provide layers of protection and still to recognize that death and serious injury are unacceptable on the roads, that humans are vulnerable and they make mistakes, that responsibility is shared, safety's got to be proactive, and it recognizes the redundancy of both protections and preventions is critical to preventing deaths. All these parts have to come together to reach the goal of toward zero deaths. As I described before, the FCIT toolbox is comprised of the 5 E elements. Some of the elements that we've been able to implement include engineering, rumble strips and guardrail upgrades, very significant to help vehicles stay on the road and in their lanes. Educations, including the Rural Safe Routes to School program and the Safe Lane Transportation Coalition, and enforcement. There's been more enforcement done, but unfortunately that's one of the more costly solutions, and budget issues limit the amount that can be done by the Sheriff's Office. The FCIT targeted all these tools together on the London Road Safety Corridor program that was instituted 2 years ago, which appears to have had an impact on one of the county's roads that has the highest fatality rate. So, in conclusion, there are many factors that contribute to fatal and severe crashes on county roadways. The FCIT's multifaceted approach provides a comprehensive way to address these hazards and the road safety issues most effectively within the resources we have available. And that concludes our presentation. Oh, yes.
Director Hurley.
One little piece, I get to share some exciting news for how we're trying to fund some of these E's. The first, on the engineering side, we received an $800,000 federal grant through the Safe Streets and Roads for All program to prepare a safety plan that helped to meet federal requirements to be able to access additional Safe Streets and Roads for All funding for big construction dollars for roadway improvements. This will be a year-long planning effort, likely to start this summer, and will focus on rural Lane County where most of the fatalities are happening. Excuse me. And we'll plan to provide more information to you at our next FCIT report in June. And then the second piece on enforcement, we think we've come up with a plan to fund a DUI enforcement officer through a combination of funding through the Parks Levy and an ODOT grant. So with the Parks Levy, there was $750,000 identified for security at our parks. And ODOT has had a program that would fund an officer for 3 years in sort of a step-down manner. And we've approached ODOT to see if they would stretch that funding over 5 years instead of 3 years to match up with the levy funding. And through the combination of that, we think we can have a deputy stepped up. The Parks Levy money doesn't start flowing until November, so probably actually somewhere around that time. And the deputy would be able to do enforcement in our parks during the sort of dusk hours, closure of the parks, kind of the end of hours days when we're getting the most break-ins, and then shift to a DUI enforcement officer during the peak hours for driving under the influence. So I think it'll be a nice combination of funding to meet a couple needs there. So those are my updates.
Thank you for that update, because the parks are open coincidentally with the highest fatality rates. Coincidentally, probably, but at the same time, providing prevention in that specific location seems to be a positive step. Pardon my interruption on that, but Mr. Cheney, anything further?
No, not from me, thank you.
Very good. Then I'm going to look to the board for a cue. As always, I'm going to reserve my questions for the last because I probably won't have to ask them. So do I have a cue? Vice Chair Trieger? Did you?
I couldn't tell. I was just looking to. Okay. Thank you for the presentation. I have just two questions. One is, I'm familiar with Vision Zero as well as the Towards Zero Deaths. Can you talk about the difference or the intersections between those initiatives?
I can you?
My understanding is that Towards Zero Deaths and Vision Zero achieve similar goals. I'd have to do my research to confirm the exact difference, though. Thank you for your question, Commissioner.
Sure. Yeah, I know. I'm mostly familiar with it through work on Safe Routes to School, which is mostly within the cities. So I didn't know if that was a municipality difference or. So yeah, an email follow-up just helping me understand that difference is fine. Thank you. And then the other is just process question. Very much appreciate this. I've gotten to have several briefings or report back on FCIT. And so I'm just putting out to my fellow commissioners and to you all whether there continues to be enough to report that quarterly is the right frequency to have these report backs. So that's also just sort of an open-ended question, just thinking about all the work that we have before us and time management and staff time that it takes to create presentations. As I said, I always enjoy hearing it. It's always good. But just wondering now that the program's fully up and running the way it is, whether that's still the right frequency.
Thank you. Commissioner Buck?
Thank you, Chair. I heard you say the sample size was small, but we all know one death is huge. Do you have any updates on the London Road corridor that we've had as a safety corridor? And if not today, it would be great to get an update at the next quarterly meeting.
You want to talk about that a little bit? I know some about that.
I don't want to speak inaccurately, and so I'd love to follow up with you following the meeting, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you.
And I would like to add, though, about the sample size. I'm not saying this is a small number of fatalities. These are serious. But one of the things we discussed is we're trying to extrapolate from the data. And when the data varies as much, when you've got such a small sample size, it would be really easy to draw the wrong conclusions, just as if we instituted the London Road Safety Program, and for, 2.5 years, I think, total, it has to wrap up within 3 years under the state program. Well, if the rates of accidents go way down, or if they go way up, I mean, we've done some things, but it won't be possible to conclude that that's exactly the thing. I will say that does wrap up, and you may recall this because one of the things, because these are time limited, because they found that over time, once people get used to safety corridor programs, then they lose their effectiveness, and other safety corridor programs then are reduced in effectiveness because of that. So they're a time-limited program, but it appears to have had positive effects. At least we haven't seen a spike.
That's good.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Seneca?
I did have a question. So, being that we just took over parts of Territorial Road, are those any of those stats on there? Do we know what that road has had?
Thank you for your question, Commissioner. In 2022, we had one fatality occur on Territorial at the intersection of Deming, and it was involving a motorcyclist. But that was the only fatality that we experienced on Territorial last year. There is a history of fatal crashes within Territorial, and I'm grateful to the Oregon Department of Transportation. They've shared that crash data with us, and so we do have a record of the crashes that have occurred in that corridor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Lovell?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, that fatality on Territorial Road was with my family, so I'm familiar with that one very well. So thank you for at least being attentive to that. I just wanted to say kudos to Dan Hurley and your staff. Dan, I appreciate the fact that you're opening your purview to help us out on our quest to improve our public safety. I think that DUI idea with the public park security angle was well played. So I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have a couple of quick questions. Could you bring up the map again?
Yes,
That
Chair.
one.
Is this map okay? Or-
Actually, the previous one, that one right there.
Yep.
No, that one that shows the state highways on it, which we're not measuring state highways for this purpose, but state highways are obviously inside of Lane County. I'll get back to that in just a second. You know, our goal is to give you a sample size of 0, right? That's the sample size we're looking for, and that's the only discussion we really should have. You know, keeping track of what causes the accidents, when you have only 2 or 3 accidents, or as accident numbers diminish, it's more difficult to discern exactly what it was. But one thing that you kind of hinted at, Mr. Cheney, is regarding enforcement. And I'm not sure exactly what you said. Did you say that enforcement seems to not have a tremendous effect? Or did I mishear that?
Oh, I probably didn't make that. I'd make myself clear. No, it's just we have limited resources. The sheriff's office has limited resources to be patrolling, particularly rural roads, which are remote, and they take a lot of staff time for a section of roads. So there's a limited ability to do that.
Okay, and my experience with that is that I'm a driver, and I want to drive the speed limit. And the things that remind me that I'm not driving the speed limit cause me to go ahead and back down to the speed limit. And sometimes there's a sign that says, you are driving 58 miles an hour, and the speed limit's 20. No, I mean, you know, so, but, you know, you get the flashing sign. And so most people, I think, want to obey the law unless they are either scofflaws or really in a hurry to be someplace, or they simply like the feel of the car underneath them, you know. So my point there is that I used to drive from Tillamook to University of Oregon. I'd go home on weekends when I was a freshman there. And every time I'd drive down Highway 99 and I'd hit the Lane County line, and it seemed that every time there was a sheriff's car right there. State highway, Highway 99, but there was always a sheriff's car right there, and there were 2 deputies in it. And it always kind of gave me a sense of relief that, yeah, I'm finally back in Lane County where I belong. But it also gave me a sense of relief that, the highways were safe, even though I drove a Volkswagen, and I tended, there was no measurement on the pedal all the way to the ground is the way Volkswagens work. But, the fact that we used to have sheriff's deputies virtually every place, even on state highways. Now, this is just a lament. It's not really a call for any kind of action other than the kind of action, Mr. Mokrajski, that we pay close attention to. Getting more sheriff patrol on the highways will, in my estimation, based on my personal experience, cause people to drive more slowly. It will. And you have told us that the speed has a direct influence on the fatalities. And it probably has a direct influence on the number of accidents as well as the fatalities. So it's a call for more sheriff patrol. That's something that we need to be looking at all times. And as a board, we need to, in my estimation, focus a lot on how do we get more sheriff patrol, because we want that number of, what was it, 26?
In 2022, we had 16 fatalities.
16, excuse me, down to 0. And now, let's go back to Highway 126. I said I'd get back to that one. It's often been called the most fatal stretch of highway in the state, yet we don't show the numbers on it, yet it is in Lane County. Do you have any numbers on 126? And Oren's here, because I'm pretty sure you are pretty deeply involved in the safety effort about 6 years ago, perhaps, that we really put a great deal of effort into making 126 a safer road. Do you have numbers on the number of fatalities on Highway 126?
I don't have numbers for 2022 Chair Farr, on 126, specifically because of that quality control delay for the data that we received from the Oregon Department of Transportation. Later this month, we'll receive the data for 2021.
Okay.
So we're a bit behind in terms of when we receive state data.
And no fault of yours for not having that data, but the point that I want to make there is that we did make certain adjustments, engineering adjustments to Highway 126. Some of it was removing trees. Some of it was shortening the passing lane on Humbug Mountain, or whatever that mountain is, Badger Mountain, where people used to speed up because the passing lane went right around the corner and then stopped abruptly. And now the passing lane, even though the road's still wide, the passing lane was shortened, and I see less people trying to pass me that last minute there. So my question is, can we get data on how the engineering improvements on 126 have affected the number of fatalities? Not that we have any effect, it's not in our jurisdiction, but can we use some of the techniques that we use there on our highways, which mainly are speed limit 55, and mostly are a little bit curvier in nature, and sometimes icier in the winter because of the shade. That was my question on 126. So, for the board, any further questions? And we'll hang on Commissioner Krieger's, Vice Chair Krieger's question regarding the frequency, and we'll get some report on that before the next regularly scheduled meeting. Mr. Cheney.
Could I ask a follow-up question on that? Perhaps something, should we consider like a written report quarterly and then perhaps maybe an annual maybe a combination? Would that be something that would be an option just to take back?
Yeah, that could be a great middle ground that we could try for a while, is sort of twice yearly and then interim twice yearly written reports, just because, the numbers are what the numbers are, or perhaps more information about what are some of the measures other than enforcement that we're taking. And I know, a lot of this conversation I'm hearing, right, is the correlation causation challenge, right? We can say we're doing these things and the numbers are either going up or down, but whether that's because of these interventions or just happen to happen at the same time. And so that's what I was trying to get at, is are we really seeing enough activity and changes? So that could be a great middle ground, is to do some written reports twice yearly and just come to us. But again, always happy to hear about the great work we're doing, so not wanting to cut you off at the knees on that either.
Well, thank you for the presentation, Ms. Pettigrew, Mr. Cheney, and Ms. Mills. Thank you for being here this morning. Information is always available if we need to get further information, further depth of analysis. Excuse me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Farr.
Then, Ms. Pettigrew, this moves us to item 10B, which is announcements from your.
you, Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. Good afternoon. Some brief announcements from the Office of County Council today. As you know, we've been working towards stabilization of our workforce and our office, and I'm pleased to share that we have made one step in a positive direction, and that is that we have now filled both of our open seats for Assistant County Counsel 2. Last we spoke, I announced the hire of Rebecca Dorman, experienced land use and tax attorney, and today I'm here to announce the hire of Steve Thiel. Mr. Thiel has been working in the public safety sphere for some time, dedicated public servant. His last two jobs have been as a deputy district attorney in Benton County and previous to that in Josephine County. In those two counties, he led mental health and behavioral health dockets. He did civil commitment work. He oversaw death investigations and most recently has been doing a mixed felony caseload. The DAs in those two counties gave him the most high remarks they possibly could, and we are just delighted to have Steve join our team. He also brings additional background in civil law as well as doing field advocacy before he went to law school. We're very delighted to have Steve join us again, and I hope that you will join me in welcoming him in early April when he starts in our office.
We should check on that because we have a cap on the number of Steves. I see two right in front of me, and more probably on the horizon. So,
There are never enough Steves, Chair.
like a salary cap, I guess. I know.
Yes. And then secondly, I wanted to share with you that in the area of modernizing our office and bringing some professionalization to our office, we are working on two projects, both technology related. The first is looking at our public records system and how we can leverage technology to make that more efficient for our users, our departments, as well as the public who are seeking information about the work that we do and the documents that we possess. And then also looking at a case management software system. On both of those projects, we're getting some outstanding support from Technology Services. We have a team looking into potential software solutions. I would be happy to share our progress with you at our next couple of meetings, as well as offer some demos for you to take a look at as we move into possible contracts with those platforms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Pettigrew. Council. Then we'll move on down our agenda. Oh, I should ask, any questions? I see none, that's a good sign. Then we'll move down to Commissioner's business. Excuse me, no, we won't. We won't skip county administration. Supposed to smile when it's
Your choice. You had
Is
your
it?
chance.
All right.
Another Steve.
So on item 11A, we have a discussion on Holiday Farm fire recovery an update. Excuse me, just a discussion. Mr. Mokrahowski, would you take a moment to introduce your panel, please?
Yes. These two, Steve Adams is our policy director, and Matt McCray is our disaster recovery manager. And
Mind if we call you Steve?
Please. Steve McCray is fine. Thank you.
So Steve and Matt will give you an update on really the great work that continues to happen. And I think we do have some emerging news and information to share. So go ahead, Steve, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mokrahowski. Chair Farr, Commissioners, thank you so much for the opportunity to present before you. 2 weeks ago, you took up some items on your consent calendar that we requested. There wasn't time to do this more full presentation of the import of what you took up in that 2 weeks ago, but we wanted to move with speed and alacrity. So even when we submitted the package, specifically an intergovernmental agreement for $4.1 million from the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department for fire recovery funding, we weren't even certain that we were going to have it prepared. So we had been working on this. And Chair Farr, you will recall some months ago your suggestion to Mr. McCray and I that we engage with Director Bell specifically on really trying to move the funding that the state legislature had appropriated to that department back in 2021. So in the 2021 long session, the legislature appropriated about $150 million in general fund and lottery revenue to OHCS for wildfire recovery. That money was stuck as it were, in coming into Lane County. When I had the opportunity to join Mr. McCray on the recovery side, we really focused on what we could do to try to shake that money loose. We had the opportunity, Commissioner Buck, myself, Mr. McCray, and Mr. Kyler met with Director Bell and her Deputy Director, Caleb Yount, in the Board of County Commissioners small conference room on the 13th of January. She and her deputy, Caleb, were frank about the failures of the agency, the issues that they had experienced during the pandemic. If they were moving the rent relief dollars out the door, there were a number of issues, and they were trying to stand up the $422 million federal Community Development Block Grant Disaster Recovery Fund. So they had a lot on their plate. True enough, but they recognized that they had not moved with the same degree of alacrity that the fire recovery process demanded. They apologized, and they indicated that with that conversation with us, they were making a specific commitment to start over. So that process began in mid-January. We worked specifically with them. I saw ample evidence from that agency and from their leadership and the care specifically that the Deputy Director, Caleb Yount, who became my primary contact in moving the dollars through. So we were able to get to a final contract, something that we had spent months and months and months to try to get beyond a number of provisions that we felt were unduly restrictive and not at all reflective of the very clear legislative direction in providing the $150 million that the agency was, the intent was very clear, was supposed to support a broad range of activities. So anyway, all of that is to say that has landed. You all approved that, and in the very same session that you approved that, you also, as a board, gave Chair Farr authorization to sign a commitment letter for $800,000 for affordable housing development. So in the very meeting that you took possession of the dollars, you also actually allocated the first tranche of those dollars. Now that is acting with speed, and it is something that makes me as staff quite proud of the work that this board in this county has been able to do. We have an additional $900,000 within a broader range of funding that was provided in that 2001 legislative session that has yet to leave OHCS hands. We're working with them. They still don't believe they have specific authority to fund the projects that have been identified by this county. We're working with them to get additional legislative clarity this current session as the legislature is sitting. So specifically, today we wanted to take a moment to give you a more full accounting of the 4.1, the dollars that have been allocated, and Mr. McCray's ongoing efforts upriver to engage our wildfire-affected community to really kind of program the remaining dollars. The other piece is that we'll set the stage for the advent of the $422 million in federal funds. This is our delegation in DC worked very hard to get this authorized for us, and OHCS has executed that contract with HUD. So we anticipate those dollars to begin flowing. Now we have some issues there, as you know, and this board has been extremely supportive of our efforts to advocate for what we think is our fair share in the recovery dollars and for the appropriate use of those dollars. And we're not finished, but I think on the basis of the conversation that we had and that Commissioner Buck led on behalf of Lane County, I think we have a different kind of relationship now with OHCS. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague.
And Mr. McCray, if I may take a moment, I believe Vice Chair Trieger has a question. And just a quick thing, I only say words, you do the do's, you know, so to give me credit for the work you did is very, very generous. So you do the work. All I do is say a few words every now and then. So thank you for that. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that update. It's great news. One of the contextual pieces you didn't mention that I don't know if this came up in the OHCS meeting, but of course they were also working under administration in transition. And we now have a new governor who is given a very strong direction around housing and homelessness and housing production. And I know a lot of the specifics of her emergency order don't necessarily apply to the fire affected area, but do you see any opportunity or way to leverage or sort of piggyback on that directive coming from the governor around housing production specifically that might help spur OHCS to continue in this new cooperative direction?
Well, Chair Farr, Commissioner Trieger, it's a great question. Frankly, I think there might be some risk of having the intensity of the focus on housing production and the governor's executive order whilst also attempting to manage recovery. The recovery function is relatively new at OHCS. It only exists, maybe it's 2 years old now that they've really been standing up, and I think we experienced some of the growing pains. I think it's quite clear that the Kotek administration is really much more intensely focused on agency performance across the board. I think we see great evidence of that in other areas as well. So far, so good is what we're saying. But I think there's still, we need to attend to this relationship as we go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Adams, please.
Great. Thank you so much, Chair, Commissioners. We were here before you in January, so it hasn't quite been a quarter, but I am going to take the opportunity just to update you on the permit figures as we typically do, just to provide consistency on that front. So, and Diana is helping me with the presentation. So next slide, please. Thank you. So looking at the number of survivors who are in shelter, not surprisingly and thankfully, we are down to single digits, which is fantastic. It's been more than 2 years now, and we're eager to see folks out of shelter and into full housing. So that I suspect within the next few months, we'll see that go to zero. Next slide, please. And then just a rundown of some of these figures, some of which you've seen. The total number of dwellings lost, 517. We now are seeing 308 dwelling permits issued. So that's total. That includes the number of dwellings that have been completed, those that are in review, and those that have been issued. So we're seeing positive movement there. And then I just want to call your attention to the number of dwellings completed. So 160 total. As of March 8th. Next slide, please. And this is just that same figure, but showing you the trend over time. Since October 2021 on the left to March 2023 on the right, the gray line is building permits issued, the yellow line is homes completed, and then the blue line across the top is the total number of dwellings lost, just to give a sense of scale. Next slide, please. And then just additional context, the total number of properties that were affected by the Holiday Farm fire was 600, and we've seen 166 of those properties sold since the fire in 2020. We still have 96 RV permits. Those are free RV permits, so no charge to residents to get those permits. So 96 permits still, so many people living in RVs, many of them while they're working on reconstructing their home. And then an accounting of the total value of the permit fees waived. So you all chose to waive permit fees for both residents and commercial structures, almost $1.5 million total value in waived permit fees to date. Next slide, please. And then I'm going to come to this slide. Actually, we'll just go right through this. I want to share this was in your packet, so hopefully you had a chance to take a look at some of the proposed uses for the total. It's total of $5 million that we will be receiving ultimately from Oregon Housing and Community Services. As Mr. Adams presented, we're still working on the last $900,000, but in round numbers, it's about $5 million. And so I'm going to very briefly go through these. Again, you have fuller descriptions in the packet. And yeah, so there's an opportunity for us to have conversations about individual lines on here, though we don't need to if there aren't any questions. We're working on Blue River Drive engineering. Becky Taylor is taking the lead on that effort. In fact, she's hosting a public meeting on Saturday upriver to get public feedback, community feedback on design concept for Blue River Drive. So we're funding that project directly with these OHCS funds. We're doing a Blue River retracement survey. I want to call out Jay Blamé, who's leading that effort. He's our county surveyor. So we've hired a survey contractor that will begin work on a Blue River survey here shortly. And that will be surveying all the properties as well as the rights of way in downtown Blue River. We're also looking at providing funding to the long-term recovery group to distribute for individuals and families as they're working towards their individual recovery. So it's really one of the more direct ways for us to provide dollars directly to survivors. We don't typically do that. The county, we're not distributing those dollars, so the long-term recovery group does that, and they do a remarkable job. We're also looking to fund non-Blue River property surveys. So because those properties in downtown Blue River are getting a survey paid for, we're looking to provide that benefit to survivors that are outside of the downtown Blue River area. Additional individual assistance going through our the Wildfire Recovery and Resilience Account, WRRA program. So we're working with Dev Northwest to distribute those funds. So additional funding there. We're looking to set aside $500,000 to support the installation of communications conduit while undergrounding work is being done upriver, both in the Blue River area where there's quite a bit of infrastructure development, but also with one of our utility partners up the Mackenzie corridor. There's a potential for us to get conduit in the ground that can in the future hold fiber or broadband to serve the community upriver. We're also proposing funding for an additional recovery project manager, so somebody to assist with all the various work involved in recovery. We're proposing to continue paying for a grant and finance manager for 18 months. Mr. Adams mentioned the affordable housing project that you all gave a nod to 2 weeks ago. Really appreciate your collective support of that project. So that will pay for pre-development costs for several dwellings in the Blue River area. Next slide, please. And the last few projects here proposed. Proposed funding for Forest Glen Park and Boat Ramp. That's a county park right in Blue River that gets a tremendous amount of use and was burned over in the fire. Also proposed funding for Blue River Park, which is a community park right on Blue River in the town of Blue River, right in downtown Blue River. And then finally proposing some funding to support the establishment of a community organization, which is an advisory body to this board. Or we're really looking for a way to help make it more efficient to get input from the community and for the community to provide direct recommendations and feedback to you all and to us as staff as we're working on recovery projects. And lastly, this is not on this list, but I want to note that we have an intergovernmental agreement with eWeb, which is funneling dollars towards septic incentives to help people replace their septic systems or repair their septic systems if they were damaged in the fire. I just want to commend the team at eWeb who has they've not only used the funding that we're able to point their direction, but they've applied for funding from Department of Environmental Quality, and they're putting these together into a package of $3 million total. And already that program just opened up about a month ago, and we've seen 85 applications for assistance with septic replacements, which is fantastic. And we just recently amended that contract with eWeb to make those funds available for commercial property owners as well. So just seeing great movement and uptake of that program. That's all I have by way of comments, so we'll leave it to you all for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCray. Mr. Adams, anything further? Very good, then I'll look to a queue for questions or comments from the board. Start with you.
I always have a comment.
You get first and last. Okay.
Well, if you'll indulge me for a moment, I have a big hobby that I spend a considerable amount of time on in my free spare time, and that's generally genealogy and doing my ancestry research, but not just, who's in my family tree. What's really intriguing to me is what's happening in the places that they live at the time and what they're going through, what's happening, in the course of history during generations past. And I was thinking the other day, as it applies up Blue River, and we've had generations of families that have lived up there. It takes decades, actually literally generations, to build a community. And trying to recreate an entire community that's been wiped out in just a couple of years is not for the faint of heart. It's not a normal way of rebuilding a community, right? We're trying to get them up and back on track as fast as humanly possible. But that's not normally how communities and small towns build themselves over the course of history. I really appreciate all that we have done here on the board. This list that we're showing today was a really big deal 2 weeks ago. But I saved my comments at that time specifically for what was happening in today's time regarding anti-Semitism, hate, and bigotry, because at the time and it still is a very big deal today. But having this funding, which has been long sought, is a big deal and just a fraction of all the resources and energy it takes to rebuild an entire community. And at the same time, I really want to acknowledge everything that the victims, the wildfire victims, have had to go through in the last few years. Nothing is quick enough to get them back in their homes. But I also just wanted to provide that bit of perspective.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Looking for any further questions, comments from the board? Commissioner Seneca.
Well, I'm glad you were commending EWEB. They must have an excellent board there.
Full disclosure, I am on the board. Thank you.
I think the staff's pretty good, too.
We went on that tour together. Where did we end up with Blue River Drive and the easement and setbacks on that?
Yeah, well, Becky Taylor, and again, with help from Jim Cheney, have developed a really great solution, in my opinion, which will be coming to you in the next couple of months, which is to adopt the setbacks that were originally platted in 1906, which creates consistency with the buildings that were cited there beforehand. So I'm going to let her describe that when it comes to you, because she'll do a better job than I will, but that's the plan. So hopefully we'll have a resolution here before too long.
Awesome, that's great. Great news, thank you.
And thank you for that question, because I had an ear to that particular item also, and I'd heard that Ms. Taylor has been stepping forward and answering a lot of questions in that regard. Thank you.
Yep.
Further comments, questions from the board? I'm seeing none. Very thorough presentation. The single-digit number, 9 people still in shelter. That's pretty remarkable. Now, it's been a while, but to get us down to the point in time where we really are within striking distance of relocating everybody either back to their own dwellings where they chose to live prior to the fire or into new dwellings. That's no small amount of work and no small amount of teamwork that took place. And I will say one more thing before I go to you, Vice Chair Krieger, and that is regarding Director Bell. And I'll pass this along to Director Bell. I think that she has really taken an interest in Lane County in particular. Now, she's paying the same kind of attention to other counties that I've seen her paying to Lane County, then bravo for her, because I really do see her eye down here and really answering questions in a very specific and detailed manner, and really helping us with some of the issues that we have in Lane County very, very specifically. So thank you for that report, Mr. Adams. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, and also to give a chance to make it an even better number, just to be sure, that 9, that's individuals or households?
Yeah, it's individuals.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for that point. Yeah. Very good.
If I may, everything related to recovery is teamwork, and you called it. It's a ton of work on behalf of a number of partners. So not only Lane County staff, Homes for Good staff, Department of Human Services, OHCS, that have all done tremendous work to help relocate those people. It's certainly not ours alone, but we're a piece of it. Thank you.
And thank you. Ongoing work, and it's not over yet. So very good. Thank you for the presentation. With no further questions, we'll move down the agenda. And as the room clears, Ms. Mokraski, I'll look to you. We have next our affordable housing plan. What a great day we're having today. Our affordable housing plan is a quarterly update. And Ms. Mokraski, I know.
Swap one Matt for one other Steve M.
I've got another Steve at the table.
We have three Steves going on here.
Steve Manella, were your ears burning this morning? Because I was talking about you. Please.
We now have two Steve M's and a Steve A at the table. This should be pretty straightforward for all of you.
And Steve
So-
McRae is leaving, so.
Steve Adams, our policy director, of course, is with us, and it's great to welcome back Steve Manella, who for nearly 40 years was with us here in Lane County as our human services manager and retired last year. So great to welcome Steve back, who's been doing some really outstanding work on our Affordable Housing Action Plan. So I'll turn it over to Steve Adams first.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mokrahysky, Chair Farr, Commissioners. It is my pleasure to welcome Steve Manella back to this table. It has been a moment. Steve has been serving an emeritus role in the policy shop. He's working half-time now on housing issues for us. He's been invaluable to me, really and truly, during this period of time, really helping us reformulate the Affordable Housing Action Plan and some of the work forward in that regard, as well as this moment when Governor Kotek has stepped forward, declared an emergency around unhoused issues, and we are seeing a surfeit of legislative activity during this session. Having Steve and certainly the 40 years of experience that he brings to the table has been an incredibly important advisor to me and has helped me kind of shape my thinking, and I think Steve is doing incredible work specifically. So it's my great pleasure to kind of spend a minute talking about some of the work that we've been doing. And we have the presentation up. Thank you. So in November of 2022 was the last time I had the opportunity to brief the board on the Affordable Housing Action Plan work plan. So at that moment, I had really just kind of articulated that between April and November of 2022, we saw an increase in the mortgage rates of 225 basis points, and we had seen a principal and interest increase of about $515 associated with that interest rate increase during that period of time for the median house. We talked specifically about the nature of the housing market within Wayne County. We kind of entertained the assumption that the vast majority of homes for sale were within the metro urban growth boundary, and we looked at the 1,629 parcels are homes that were for sale at that time in November, and noted that half of them were in fact outside of Eugene Springfield. So that there was a very substantive role here in terms of the work that we could be doing with the Affordable Housing Action Plan. We looked specifically at some of the capacity challenges that really were coming from the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis, both in terms of our construction workforce, but also just in terms of the capacity associated with local government's ability to move building permits as quickly as we needed to move them in order to address a very long-standing underbuild that really dates back to the 2008 crisis, and the kind of demographic factors that really matured in the last couple of years that have elevated the demand and have made the market even more tight. So we spoke to those issues, and we talked specifically about how interest rates were really working against us at a moment in which we were trying to put our foot on the gas and moving forward. And so we noted specifically that we really needed to rethink the Affordable Housing Action Plan that we had put forward, that we recognized that there were deeper, more systemic pieces of work that we could do, and we really wanted to spend some time thinking about that. So coming out of the, next slide, please. Coming out of the November work, we really kind of continued to look specifically at the role that Lane County could more proactively play. So we see specifically in this slide the kind of seasonality that exists within the housing market that is interesting in that the difference between the winter and summer months, and this is the sawtooth that you see in this graph, you see now that our housing inventory as we come into the winter months here are specifically lower now than our highs are now lower than the lows 5 years ago, right? So this is just a growing indicator of the tightness of this market. And next slide, please. All right, so, and we continue to see that Lane County is officially a very high, that the fair market rent prices are more expensive than 95% of other areas nationally. So we're really right up there specifically. So specifically the 23 FMR for a 2-bedroom in Lane is $1,349, 3-bedroom at $1,917. In January 23, the median listing price was $470,000, trending up 4.4% year on year. And the median price per square foot was $290. Next slide, please. So indicators, again, of a very expensive market and a very tight market specifically. And against the cost, we're looking specifically at the need. This is the Regional Housing Needs Assessment prepared by Eco Northwest. And these are the numbers against which really the governor's emergency orders and the full focus, I think, of the legislature at the moment now is really trying to move in this direction. So specifically for Eugene, you see the 5-year need. Somewhere between 75 and 11,000 homes, new units coming online within the next 5 years. And you see the contribution for Springfield specifically. And, you put that, next slide, please, together with the high and lows for our smaller cities. And this comes up with the 16,000 number that we're looking at from a county perspective. When we look specifically in the Eugene Housing Implementation Pipeline has been kind of articulated by city government in Eugene, specifically their capacity that they're building for is 5,000 units over this period of time. So they don't have the capacity to produce at what we're looking at. Now the governor has indicated her goal to produce 36,000 units per year statewide. So if you take the rule of 10% for Lane County, as we typically do, that's 3,600 units a year here. And that's significantly more than the kind of production capacity that we've seen. So we're up against it. The housing stock is expensive. The finances are not, that wind is not at our back. And we specifically need to really kind of think about where we can focus our energy. I think that one of the things that we talked about in that November briefing was the role of county government potentially really trying to help focus our effort on assisting our smaller cities. That Eugene and Springfield have specific capacity to have planning and zoning and enough staff to help them move. Our role maybe is to work with the cities. So that really kind of initiated a line of inquiry that my colleague, Mr. Manoa, has led for us. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Manoa to talk a little bit about his conversations with our small city managers. Next slide, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner Farr and Board of Commissioners. It's a pleasure to be here today. The work that I did in Human Services, a lot of it focused on the homeless issue that we have today. And what's very eye-opening working on housing is that one of the only ways that we're going to be able to do something long-term about homelessness is to be able to produce more housing and significantly more housing. So the slides that Steve just showed to you on the housing need and the targets that the communities in Lane County will have is very important. So I had the pleasure of conducting an assessment with small cities in Lane County. And we looked at both the barriers, the strengths, and some of the opportunities, as well as looked at the recommendations that they had for Lane County. So as you can imagine, probably the biggest barrier to housing development in the small cities in Lane County is infrastructure and infrastructure financing. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about SDC, system development charges, but in the state of Oregon, we have very limited financial resources available at state government to assist cities, particularly small cities, with infrastructure development. We rest a lot of our needs based upon system development charges. And what I found in my analysis was that a small city and a small city council have to have a long look to be able to increase their system development charges long in advance in order to have cash to pay for some of these major infrastructure assessments. The cost and availability of residentially zoned land within the UGB, it's not that there aren't enough properties available within the UGBs in the small cities. The availability, there are two strikes against the availability. One is the issue that I just mentioned, the infrastructure to the sites, and the second one is the owner's willingness to sell. There are some prime residential lots in some of our small cities and that are family held, and the families are holding on to those as investments for the future. So being able to provide incentives to release some of that property for housing development is something that we should look at. Again, the staffing levels, as you know, with our land management, it's the same with the small cities in Oregon, that the staffing needed to assist in the development process is based upon the fees that are brought in. So, you know, if you're a developer looking at a piece of property, you're looking at a piece of property, it doesn't have any infrastructure to it yet. So you're going to have to factor in, well, what's the cost going to be to put in the infrastructure to the property? What are the fees going to be? What is the cost of materials? And all of that goes into that process. But what our small cities find is that often they don't have staffing available when a developer comes in with an inquiry. Even those, in some cases, that have an engineering firm or an architecture firm that's working with them, they basically have to wait until they have a deal on a piece of property and somebody pays the fees. And in that case, they need to look at whether or not those are one-time revenues coming in to support staffing or contracting with a contractor or not. So this problem really is somewhat unique to Oregon, and it's reflective of our revenue structure in the state, that we've bared a lot of costs on the SDC process. And then finally, something that our land management staff helps with, and all of our small cities were very complimentary about this, was the annexation of unincorporated residential areas within city UGBs. So many of our cities have UGBs that include unincorporated county property and require the assistance of county staff to develop them. Next slide, please. So here are the opportunities. I found that all of the communities in Lane County, the elected officials, the people in city government, have the political will and support for new housing development. That's not lacking. As I mentioned before, there's significant residentially zoned acreage within UGBs in the county. So in a lot of cases, you know, it's not a matter of looking at expansion of UGB, although there are some communities that are looking at that. It's a matter of making available that residential property for development. All of our communities have experience both working with for-profit and nonprofit developers. There's some good examples of that. In Florence, for example, there are 3 projects that are currently under development there. Most of our cities have modern zoning codes that allow for middle housing, so that was very helpful to see that our cities are getting into being able to do cluster developments and other kinds of alternative housing. And then some cities have seen significant multifamily development, particularly Junction City has had a couple of projects in the last couple of years, and Cottage Grove as well. And then most of our SDCs are below the state average of $15,000. Next slide.
We skipped one.
Yeah, if you could go back, please. So this is very instructive. This is the way that the cities in Lane County structured their SDC rates. And you can see there's a variation. SDCs can get in the way of multifamily developments.
Is there a reason Coburg's not up there?
This data was taken from a report that was done for the legislature, and neither Coburg or Springfield were included in that study. But Coburg is close to $30,000. And you see up there, Veneta is close to $25,000. And what you find with some of the rates, like with Veneta, is that's reflective of their need to do some sewer improvements and some wastewater improvements that they're needing to put into their SDC rates. So when you look at, let's say you're a nonprofit developer even, and you want to do a 60-unit development in Veneta, even for a private developer, you're looking at $25,000 per unit that you're having to include.
And Coburg is worse.
Yeah, Coburg is worse. They're the highest in the county.
I'll tell you why later, but go ahead.
But Coburg also is not in a position to develop much more housing. They've sort of exhausted their inventory of lands where the other cities haven't. So you see there's a variation on parks and stormwater, and then Junction City, the sewer rate is high, but Junction City is looking at an improvement to their system in order to expand development, and the city looked, I think it was over a decade ago, they were looking forward to expansion and raise their SDC rates in advance. So they have half of the cash that they need to make their improvement, whereas we have Veneta that is really in a position to develop a lot of housing. They have a lot of acreage that is zoned appropriately, but they need to come up with a better plan to improve their wastewater system in order to do so. So this is the other piece around SDCs is SDCs are increasing at a higher rate than inflation. In the same study, they said that the SDCs have been increasing the last couple of years about 8% a year. So that's significant as well. Next slide, please. So these are the recommendations, not of staff, but the recommendations from the small city folks that I spoke with. They would like to see the county and the county board advocate for more and better coordination of resources available for infrastructure development, particularly at the state level. Advocate for regulatory reform and streamlining of processes. This is specific to land use. Provide technical assistance on land use, zoning, regulatory processes for residential development. They'd like to see the county consider at some point in the future seeing whether or not it would be appropriate to be involved in financing of affordable or workforce housing. And then, as I mentioned before, they are interested in sort of having the ability, if they have a developer who approaches them, to have some sort of resource regionally so that they can have somebody work with that developer on getting that housing developed if they don't have the staff resource available at the time.
Next slide, please. Okay, and so with those recommendations in mind, I really just want to close with this slide. So this is a high-level summary slide of the bill that the governor called for passage from the legislature in the first 60 days of session. So House Bill 2001 is the policy package. This is taking on several different legislative concepts and roping them all into one. This also includes the commercial land conversion for residential development as well, and there's several other provisions. And then the funding package that is the companion is 5019. So it's on third reading on the House floor tomorrow. So this will likely clear the legislature very rapidly and move to the governor. This is not, however, the end of housing legislation that this session of the legislature will take up. There are several bills that have met the workshop deadline that they've been scheduled. So this Friday is the first culling of the bills. That anything that hasn't been scheduled for a workshop by this Friday, for the most part, is dead in terms of its legs in this legislative session. So we'll see a lot of stuff fall off of the thousands of bills that have been filed, but we're still going to see a lot of housing activity move forward. So you'll note specifically that 2001 creates a housing production requirement for cities 10,000 in population and higher. So, and it gives clear direction to DLCD to essentially manage that process and to provide for greater flexibility for cities with respect to doing things like amending UGBs or doing some other kind of code changes to try to expedite this. So cities will have to be responsive, and the package includes language of appropriate sanctions for cities that are not meeting targets. We don't know what that means, but it's out there. There's a sense of accountability for what that looks like. Now, we have cities, as Mr. Manila indicated, that are not going to fall under these regulatory targets because they're 10,000, they're less than 10,000 in population, but they're very keen to engage in doing their fair share and doing their part. As we talk to them about their community and economic development aspirations, they tell us housing is the break, right? It doesn't matter to, so much on the community and economic development front. The housing piece is what's holding them back, and they recognize that. So really and truly, as we look at the kinds of funding opportunities and the particular kind of technical assistance, we're very keen to do what we can do from a county perspective to try to bring resources to bear to help our smaller cities, specifically DLCD technical assistance dollars. We're going to be paying very close attention for opportunities to try to do some of the augmented staffing. I don't know if it's concierge service or something that will enable, particularly, our colleague in Creswell, Curtis, is the planner, and that's it. It's just Curtis. So Curtis needs some help. There's an opportunity there. If we can help them with some of their wastewater capacity issues, they can build houses. And the same is true in Veneta and Junction City, which is probably our greatest potential. But Chair Farr and Commissioners, this is the quarterly update and kind of a check-in with this board in terms of the direction of the policy team and looking at trying to advance the county's role in supporting housing development.
Thank you, Mr. Adams. I've got to say that this quarterly report is different to any we've seen before because you are giving us what seems to be good news on the horizon. Not perfect news, not ideal news, and not by any stretch of the imagination low-hanging fruit that we grab, but it is good news on the horizon because of the attention that is being focused on it. When you talk about the governor and the legislature looking at relaxing urban growth boundaries, for instance, for residential, for years we've lived in the shadow of Senate Bill 100, which caused us to not even consider expansion of the urban growth boundary. And the city of Eugene, for 40 years, has been saying we have a 20-year supply of land inside the urban growth boundary. Well, that flies in the face of what reality is. And Mr. Manella, you're talking to the small cities and identifying what are the reasons that they can't increase housing stock. Well, the cities that do have land inside their UGBs don't have the infrastructure. And the cities that don't have the infrastructure don't have the means to pay for the infrastructure other than by drastically rising the cost of housing by adding to the SDC cost. That's my prelude to the questions that you all will answer that will make it so I don't have to answer questions. I appreciate that. But I have a question. You know, we look at population growth projections, and it always seems modest to me. I got a question for you. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek. Is there climate change going on right now? Does anybody think there might be? Yeah? Has anybody ever talked about people who live in the hot places that are getting drier, wanting to live in places that are less hot and are in less imminent danger of getting drier? Yes, but do we take those numbers into account when we look at the projections for population? Because we really look at organic population growth and historical population growth without taking into account what everybody in this room, I believe, understands at some level. People living there want to live here, and more than ever will want to live here, and they'll come with big wads of cash in their hand to outspend the people who live here. Okay, so questions for the board. Look into the queue. Commissioner Lovell, followed by Commissioner Buck.
Yeah, thank you for great reports. And Steve Manella, I think you and I have that pit in our stomach where all of these solutions that we put on the board are really not the big elephant in the room.
Right.
The big elephant in the room is financing. The cost of money now is killing the housing market. There's a housing unit going on in Springfield that I'm involved with right now, 41 units. That is on the verge of collapse because the market rate went up another half point last week. So that takes the cost of doing business of those particular units from $35,000 a month, which was budgeted, to $55,000 a month. So that's a significant detour in putting housing where we need housing. So unless the county or government is willing to, I don't know, let me throw a big idea out there, take some of their reserve money and finance it at 5%, to people who can help build houses, maybe that's really the only way we can spur this market, because I'd love to be the guy who waves the positive flag, but unless the cost of money goes down, we're stuck. Any comments on that, or do you think I'm off base here?
Chair Farr, Commissioner Lovell, I watched a presentation by Hayden Holmes to the Oregon Legislature recently, to the Housing and Homelessness Committee. And they were conveying just with the interest rates rising, the delta, to come in with an affordable project, and that, the delta for home ownership for the median income in Lane County was like $100,000. And because of the interest rate increase, it's gone up to like $170,000. So again, the affordability, and it's not only on the consumer side, but it's also on the developer side, and so then what you see, in residential development is you see in Junction City, as well as other places in the county, some very nice high-end housing in Lowell, for example, and where people can afford, a $500,000 home.
Which used to be out of the realm of anybody's possibility in this area, but now it's the norm.
But I do think that we have the kind of market where, what we're seeing at the state level with what the governor's doing and what we've seen in some other communities in Oregon is there's a role for the public sector when it comes to affordable housing or workforce housing in being able to buy down the costs so that we can create the opportunity for people to have a home.
Yeah, I think the other thing that Steve Adams, you said was a little scary in my gut was that certain cities may have sanctions for basically not doing their part. It's a little looming out there. I'm not really sure what that means, but I'm hoping we can get some clarity on that pretty soon. Thank you.
Hold that thought. Thank you. Commissioner Buck, followed by Commissioner Seneca.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate talking about the infrastructure portion because I've been working with a lot of the small communities in my district who have really aging infrastructure. Their sanitation, you know this too in your district as well, of course. The rural areas just have a lot of scattered infrastructure sites for small communities that aren't even cities really yet, and can't even dream of becoming a city, even a small one, because there's no way to keep up with their infrastructure. They put in sanitation and water districts. They're small towns, so it's a handful of neighbors. They don't want to raise rates on their friends and neighbors, right? And they don't often have any side bucket of capital construction reserves. They have none. And so they either have to put a moratorium on additional housing, or they have to tell everybody to go get their own septics and wells on their sites because it's aged out. And they no longer can put in or ask the community for small incremental funding because the cost of putting a new system in is huge and the grant money is not available. There isn't enough available for them. And so we're seeing homes that probably otherwise could have been preserved just dropping off the radar and contributing to our housing issues. And preservation is near and dear to my heart in my work in housing, and we don't talk about it enough. There's a huge reservoir of homes that are just eliminated every year. And it could take just a little bit to actually preserve them and ensure that we've got some naturally occurring affordable housing still in our stock. And then also on the side, start tackling some of the bigger issues in some of the bigger cities. I don't know what we can do. I guess I would ask you, well, what can we do to help these smaller areas preserve the housing that they have? We have one person now, Robert Woodard, who I'm so happy we hired, who's working on special districts, including sanitation and water districts up in Blue River and knows many of the other small communities. Sometimes it's just a couple of streets where they've all come together and they have one water district and there's no funding to keep it up. What can we do there?
So, Chair Farr, Commissioner Buck, this is a critical question, and Rob Woodard is kind of the seed of, I think, the potential beginning of a solution in which county government can play a more active role. I think we absolutely have to continue to explore what we can do to support that. Some of that is through our federal and state advocacy work. Specifically, we were able, working with former Congressman DeFazio, to secure Water Resources and Development Act funding, environmental infrastructure dollars of $25 million. That is an authorization, not an appropriation, but nonetheless, it's the first step that enables us to begin to draw resources in that could potentially become investments in that rural infrastructure. I think certainly, from our perspective, some critical next steps for us is to take on the capability of administering community development block grant funds, which we have not administered in some time. I think there is additional engagement at the state level. I think I have come to understand in the last few months just how fragmented our state's infrastructure pots are. It's not one pot. There are multiple pots managed by different entities within state government. I think there is likely to be some action in this session, Mr. Chairman, around trying to try to laser focus the infrastructure to support housing development because of the governor's focus. So I think we have to continue to work on that. I think there's likely to become additional concepts that we bring to the legislative assembly in 2023 or 2024, I should say, and beyond to try to focus on this issue. This is, I think, a critical piece of what I think we're starting to understand our role is from a county perspective.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. This is once again a really refreshing discussion, even though it's very somber items that we are discussing. Commissioner Seneca, followed by Vice Chair Trieger.
Yeah, so Commissioner Buck and I were headed down the same road, and I mean, the deferred maintenance is really scary when you start getting into these smaller water districts. I mean, just a perfect echo. They don't want to raise the rates on their neighbor, and that, you know, then they're not welcome to the community anymore. And it's just, they're all aging out right around the same time. I mean, these are little logging towns that, a lot of them were put in by the mills and the employees and with the equipment, and all that stuff is aging out. You know, you mentioned Junction City a couple of times. One thing Junction City was lucky enough to do was, I mean, raise their sewer rates earlier.
Right.
And then they were able to purchase property, so they actually have room to grow, as some of these places they're building around the infrastructure at a certain point where you can't go anywhere. I mean, I think there's a saying about it, but sewer flows downhill. And that, you know, you can only go so far with some of these places. So yeah, it's gonna, infrastructure bills are gonna become more and more crucial for these small communities. The cost of building is just skyrocketing.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Chair Trieger.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Just briefly, you touched on the only note I had, which was a little more about CDBG funding as a resource. If you don't have anything today, then next time I'd like to hear what we're anticipating as, you know, what is that cycle? When do the opportunities arise? When are we eligible again to apply for them? Do we have specific projects or partnerships in place in mind for the first round for which we'll be eligible to go for some of that resource?
Chair Farr, Commissioner Trieger, we have from the OBDD Business Oregon, we do have guidance for the 2023 cycle. So there's a spring and a fall, and we will be prepared to go for the fall round this time around. So Oregon has, there's a number of requirements that one must meet under the Community Development Act at the federal level. Oregon requires upfront demonstration that you're compliant with a full range of these things at the time in which you are prepared to take the first draw of dollars. So we have developed, and in fact, Mr. Manila has been leading the way within county government to put together a work plan to get us fully compliant so that we are prepared to administer. So before this year is done is my goal to have our first draw of CDBG dollars that would enable us to begin to move forward. Now, the project specifically, I don't know, but my gut tells me it's probably an infrastructure project that would support rural housing. Is really kind of, I think, top of mind for us.
Yeah. Great, thank you for that.
Well, thank you to the board for the questions. I'm not going to belabor this meeting with a great many questions because there are so many that I could ask at this point. Because you're touching on areas that we've never actually touched on in board meetings before regarding how do we address the housing issue and how much of it can we begin to address upstream. You know, the other day we had a presentation on the City of Eugene's floodplain ordinance, or their flood ordinance. And I asked a simple question. I said, are we meeting or exceeding federal and state requirements when we are adding the floodplain, writing the floodplain ordinance? The answer was we are exceeding. And my question then became, why are we exceeding when that does in fact increase the cost of housing? Now, it may be a small amount, or it may be a large amount. I don't know the numbers on it. And it's offset by the fact that you pay less for insurance. You know, there are other things that really, the reasons to exceed federal and state requirements on building. But whenever we do that, we have to be cognizant of the fact that it does add to the upfront cost of building and buying a home. And every single item that we do, a little bit here, a little bit there, pretty soon you're talking about a great deal of impedance to actually building homes. And if you look at the cost of a 3-bedroom apartment in Eugene right now, $2,000 for a 3-bedroom apartment, who on earth earns enough money to afford that? Who does? Without spending well over the suggested amount that you're spending on housing. So it's outrageous what we are doing, but the help is on the horizon. And I've got to say, Mr. Manila, I'm going to look at you. It was gosh, it was 28 years ago that I first met you. We were younger. And it was when Ruth Bascom and Linda Lynch, you remember Ruth Bascom? She appointed me to the Human Services Commission way back then. I met Linda Lynch that same year, by the way. And you know, things were simpler then, but we also, we had more land that was available, and the cost of housing was so much less, so that we could look at the future housing needs without this huge shadow of the cost of housing. When houses in Bethel, when just regular tract houses in Bethel are selling for $500,000 in the affordable part of town. This is one of the affordable parts of town. You know, what are we doing? What have we done here at this table and at the other jurisdictional tables? What have we done that has got us to this point? Well, we need to begin to answer that question so that we can make sure we don't do it in the future. And that's where this conversation is beginning right now, right here today. We're talking about what do we not do in the future that causes future generations the kind of problems that we are facing based on what past generations have given to us. And Steve, I pointed out that you and I are part of that past generation. So, and the other thing I'll say, Steve, is it's really, it's good to see you able to focus on special projects, because you spent a lot of time at your desk as the Director of Human Services for Lane County with a lot on your plate and not much time to spend on the things that you could identify and talk about and not have time to do. Mr. Adams, I'm pleased that Mr. Manella is with us and doing in his, do you call it emeritus role? Of helping us to identify ways to increase the availability of housing. So with that, to the board, any further questions, any further comments? Thanks again, Steve.
Thank you so much.
Steve.
Three Musk Steves.
The three stevedores. Oh, that was bad. Then Mr. Mokrajewski will move down our agenda to item 11C on today's agenda, which is a report back on the 2021 redistricting effort with a legal analysis, process, timeline, and impacts on the potential reconsideration of commission district boundaries. And Mr. Mokrajewski, I'll ask you to take a moment to introduce your panel, please.
Thank you, Chair. So why don't we just start here to my left. Ashley Driscoll is our special counsel representing Lane County and has provided the initial legal analysis and consultation. Dina Dawson is our Lane County clerk and the head of our elections, and Judy Williams is our strategy and integration manager in county administration. So, and Judy was actively involved in the management of the committee process. I should say the development of that committee process and the management of that committee process related to the redistricting maps. So I'll just say quickly, and then I think, Judy, you're going to take the overview. On January 10th, 2023, the Board of Commissioners at your second meeting. Was that your second, or that was your first meeting? It's your first meeting? It's your first meeting. Okay, that's right. January 10th, 2023, the Board of Commissioners asked staff to report back really in three areas: with a legal analysis, a process timeline for review, and the impact on other public entities related to redistricting, the map that was approved, and other maps that were offered for consideration by the redistricting committee. So that's what we're here today to do, is to report back to you, and that's what you will hear from Judy as kind of an overview on the process that we went through, the timeline issues, and some of the history aspects. Dina will talk specifically about elections implications and timelines related to elections. And then Ashley can speak to and answer questions specifically related to Lane County Charter and legal analysis and options for the board. So Judy, turn it over to you. We have a presentation, and then we'll open up for questions to the board.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. Judy Williams, Strategy and Integration Manager. And I just found out I can run the slides, so that's wonderful. So again, as Steve mentioned, we're here as a report back to you from that January 10th board assignment to really look at the legal analysis, process timeline, and impacts of the potential reconsideration of the commissioner district boundaries. to say next slide. So again, quick overview for today. So I'm going to talk about the federal and local policies, looking at the redistricting process, those phases that we've talked about all throughout the redistricting effort. So providing some of that history, looking at the proposed maps that were presented by the Independent Redistricting Committee, and then walking through that report back. So the legal analysis, timelines, options, et cetera. And just to comment on the terms, IRC is one that you may hear throughout this presentation. This is the technical name for the committee assigned the work, so the Independent Redistricting Committee. So just wanted to clarify that. And before I begin, a lot of the materials, they're all online, and so the information is viewable. There's a board memo. I'm walking through a lot of the information that's in attachment A and attachment B. Also noted in the packet is a website, www.lanecountyor.gov/IRC, with a ton of additional information as well. So really, the federal process, kind of the main pieces to touch on here are really following the Constitution. So every 10 years, a census is required, and this is why we initiated our redistricting effort. Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment requires that state legislative districts be substantially equal. The Voting Rights Act of 1965, Section 2 says prohibits plans that intentionally or inadvertently discriminate on the basis of race, which could dilute the minority vote. And then some of the local policies, and I'll jump back to the state policies a little bit further on in the presentation. But essentially the charter language, Section 10 around membership, 3D and E essentially spell out that the boundaries of those 5 commissioner districts shall be drawn by the Board of County Commissioners so as not to deny any person equal protection of the law. Also, the Board of Commissioners shall, not less than every 10 years, initiate review of the population densities of each district and modify boundaries when necessary. No boundary creation, position, designation, or boundary change shall disqualify a commissioner from completing the term of office to which the commissioner was elected or appointed. And then finally, the Board of County Commissioners shall adopt by ordinance the district boundaries at least 6 months prior to an election for which they are to be effective. So briefly, the phases that have been talked about in terms of redistricting, kind of sum them up into 5 phases. So I will walk through each of those and kind of give a summary of what happened in each of those phases. So the first phase is really, it began essentially at least in 2020 with a lot of board conversations prior to that, but really in depth in the fall of 2020 with some listening sessions that were held, some work sessions, really getting at some specific questions such as, should elected officials be the decision makers in the process? What does member selection look like, or what should that look like? Are there changes to the process that happened previously? And so with some of that feedback, in early 2021, the board and county council created that structure based on the feedback, based on history and how we had seen redistricting effort happen previously. And so with that information, worked on that structure. Also, at the same time, we were getting a lot of information from the Census Bureau around delays with redistricting data. So knowing that the census was delayed due to COVID, a lot of this information was pushing towards some critical timelines associated with doing the work. So with that, 2 ordinances were established in June of 2021. So the first ordinance, 2103, really established like a placeholder ordinance to make sure that we met our deadlines based on the county charter and essentially kept our current maps at the time valid until there was time that the committee could do the work. So making sure that we kept that deadline. Ordinance 2104 was that actual creation of this committee, of the IRC committee. and the bylaws that went with it, and specifically lane code language as well. So phase 2 was really the formation and kind of preparation of data for redistricting. So advertisements happened for the vacancy of the committee effort. We received 50 applications. And at that time is when we really did bring in some additional staff. So at the time it was county council being the only staff person for redistricting. And while we didn't have, capacity wise, somebody just ready to go to take on this work, I saw that there was a need and stepped in. And so I did have some additional background from the 2010, 2011 redistricting effort, and just staff were tapped at that time. And so jumped in to try and help with important work. So really what we did was establish that process. There were bylaws that really specified how members were being selected. So there was redacted applications. Each commissioner got a packet of redacted applications for their district, chose one person, and from that, the 5 that were chosen, we met about 4 times, and those 5 chose the remaining 10 members plus 3 alternates from that redacted selection pool. So it's an 18-body committee, 15 plus 3 alternates. We started right away with trainings, so really looking at not just trainings for the committee, but trainings publicly too. Every meeting that we had was, the public was invited, had public comment options at every meeting, but really the training was for the community too. So looking at what is redistricting, what are some of the laws around that, what are the state directives, what is the work that's gonna be coming, what do communities of common interest look like for you, look like for your committee, trying to get that detail from both the body and the community. The committee also chose the software that we used, so there was a selection process on what software should we be using, and what training looked like. So we did a lot of training efforts, and this is a picture also to remind that this was all virtual too. So this was looking back at my calendar, just remembering we met at least twice a week and at least 2 hours, and it was mostly nights, evenings, some daytime meetings, but a lot of dedicated committee members really pulling together to get this work done. Some of the highlights of the conversations, again, there's a lot more in depth that I won't go into, but how do we get participation came up quite a bit. How do we have that robust engagement? What about the population? So what might that objective look like based on the numbers that we're receiving? What did the district descriptions mean in the charter? And I'll speak to that soon. And then also, what are the communities of common interest? So again, as we're in that preparation phase, looking at how much could we prepare as a committee before knowing that we were getting that data soon, and the state was also working on their redistricting effort at that same time. The other piece to highlight here around population in that early phase, so a couple tables in front of you. Really, the bottom table is how the districts looked after the 2011 effort. So the population breakdown, you can see that variation was around a 1% variance allowed for each of those districts. So the top table is really how do the numbers now look? So if we were looking at equal population and knowing how the districts were looking, that variance was more than 1% in many areas. And so while the 2010 redistricting effort looked a little bit different in many ways, the variance was really close. So one of the maps that was presented in 2011 to the board at that time was remain the maps as is. So knowing that this population difference existed and knowing kind of the guidelines and the directive, the committee did decide on sticking with the 1% variance as well. Another of those conversations were really around the Secretary of State redistricting directive, so which states that each district or precinct, as nearly as practical, shall, and then there's criteria here. So be contiguous, utilize existing geographic or political boundaries, not divide communities of common interest, be connected by transportation links, and for districts be of equal population. The other piece, as mentioned, that not just happened in phase 2, but conversations throughout the process was going back to the charter language around district descriptions. So I just put these up here. I won't read them all, but a couple of them as an example. So it spells out in each district, such as West Lane County District, generally comprised of Western Lane County outside of the metropolitan area.
Pardon me, Judy, you have quotation marks around these. These are directly from the charter.
Yes, that is correct. Thank you. And Springfield District, generally comprised of the Springfield metropolitan area. So the only reason highlighting it here, it was lots of conversations were had around, you know, what does that mean? Are there definitions? Are these more clearly defined? Knowing that the committee had the legal aspects to adhere to, the population variance, the state directive with the criteria of be contiguous, look at communities of common interest, look at transportation links, political and geographic boundaries, these charter descriptions. So just trying to, as committee members, take all of that in and know that they were creating the maps based on all of that criteria and balancing that. This is just an image of the software, not any particular area, but really just to highlight that once committee members started drawing, there isn't, you know, like one line that you could just draw or a perfect box or such. There are these census blocks that pick up a certain percentage of voters or a certain number of voters. And so it's playing with all of that information in order to move forward with some recommended maps. Phase 3. So this is really the state finished their work. We did have that data, and again, now kind of just balancing all of that information. There were ultimately 19 maps submitted. Everybody on the committee had the ability to create maps. And in some cases, while some might have good ideas, they didn't feel that they had the technical expertise to build or create those maps, so that sometimes there were partnerships or people worked together to get one other person's ideas created. So 19 maps submitted. And I just felt like there was a quote that the chair of the IRC was alluding to in the report that I just felt was helpful in describing this. So she said, the process of creating a commissioner district map is a series of contingent decisions, trade-offs, and consequences. You know, further, I think it's helpful just that she says, when boundaries are drafted for one district, those residents are excluded from neighboring districts. A seemingly great idea about how to set the boundary for one district may create such chaos in other districts that the idea might be set aside. Balancing the considerations required of the redistricting effort is complex, nuanced, and challenging. So finally, in phase 3, and throughout in phase 2 and 3, but just really had that engagement with residents, with the community, did a number of news media events, posted maps around the county, and had public input at all meetings. And then eventually the IRC did vote on October 28th to send 3 maps to the commissioners. So specifically with the charge of the IRC and the creation of that, their charge was to submit 2 to 4 maps to the board, and the board had to choose from those maps, and they chose 3. So I'll briefly try and walk through those 3 maps. There's 2 series of maps for each one, kind of an overview and then a detail. And as I will briefly describe some of the characteristics, The IRC committee was asked to present them in order, order to the board, and then highlight strengths and weaknesses for each map. So I will walk through some of those. So map J is that first map that the IRC recommended. And they're stating that map J strives to unify River Road and Santa Clara neighborhoods. It utilizes the natural geographic boundary of the Willamette River to the east of the River Road Santa Clara area and the railroad tracks to the west at the cutoff of the transportation links from the River Road Santa Clara area and the Coburg area and Bethel areas. Again, this is a zoomed in look, and one thing I guess to note for clarity, as you're looking at some of the maps, the red line on here is what's labeled as current commissioner district boundaries. These are submitted, so the red line is the prior existing commissioner district boundaries, and then the coloring, so if you look at the purple D2, you can see some expansion of that in map J to the south and a little bit to the north that it's going outside of those lines. So this is describing how that map is shown. Some of the additional strengths that were notified: it unifies the Bethel School District, maintains District 1 and 5 as primarily outside of the Eugene-Springfield city limits. Some of the weaknesses, and you'll hear this is a common theme, that some of the strengths are the weaknesses, but map places a majority of the Bethel School District within District 4. It places a majority of the River Road Santa Clara neighborhood within District 1. Like another map from this committee, this map would have District 2 western boundary extend across I-5, which is discussed quite often of what might be like a east-west border. Map Q, briefly, strives to maintain transportation corridors within the districts, maintains I-5 as the western boundary of the District 2. I'll zoom in on that so you can see a little bit more of that detail, quite different than map J. Majority of Bethel School District within one district, unifying school districts and 4J catchment areas. Some of the weaknesses established: a greater percentage of land and population that are shared between the areas within and outside of the Eugene and Springfield UGBs. Map divides Mohawk-Marcola Valley area between Districts 2 and 5. And proposes extending District 4 into an area previously included in District 1. And then map C, the final map presented by the IRC strives to make as few changes as possible to the 2011 districts. The map moves the fewest residents out of the areas from their 2011 commissioner district. Zoom in there so you can see some of those areas. It uses major roads for many district boundaries, maintains District 1 and 5 as primarily outside of the city limits. And then for weaknesses, it does divide the Bethel neighborhood between Districts 1 and 4. And this map also would have District 2 western boundary extend across I-5. Again, submitted prior, when the IRC was bringing this to the board. So this population, again, the existing district boundary description here is based on the 2011 map. And then this is just a population breakdown where you can see those variances for some of those maps. A couple more slides here. It was asked kind of that comparison. So this is really just showing inside or outside of the UGB. So if you're looking at the far left, this is the current or prior map. What is that percentage for District 1, that first bar? What's that percentage inside the UGB? And then it goes through each of the districts. Then that next quadrant looks at map J, map Q, and map C respectively. So phase 4, after this came to the Board of County Commissioners, and so it has to, per charter, in ordinance form. So November 9th was the first reading and setting a second reading and public hearing. November 30th, we had one public hearing, and it was previously noted to make it as accessible as possible, having an evening public hearing as well. So we had a continued public hearing, and the board did ultimately adopt December 1st, that first map J. And then with this, I'm going to turn it over to Dina, the clerk, to talk a little bit about the finalization process as well as implementation.
Thank you, Judy. Chair and commissioners, thank you. Nice to meet new commissioners. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. Again, I inherited this redistricting process, and it was very surprising when I started in July to learn that we would be redistricting commissioner districts after the election. So although this is the finalization process from those efforts, we're doing the work right now. So our office is just wrapping up the finalization process. So once we got through the November election, we started working with the Lane Council of Governments, LCOG, to be able to implement the commissioner district boundary changes. We waited for the commissioner districts to draw the precinct lines for Lane County. And so currently, there are 66 precincts within Lane County. And then within those precincts, there are 446 different unique combinations of split districts. So when we're talking about splits, or when you hear split precincts come up, that's what we're referring to as a unique combination of districts within a precinct. There was some flexibility provided to the clerk's office to be able to adjust the maps if we needed to. But although there was a little bit of flexibility, we made no changes to map J. We made the statewide voter registration system match the boundaries, the work that we're concluding right now. When we began working with LCOG in January after wrapping up the election, we basically provide to them, I'm going to describe the process a little bit in detail. We provide to them an export from the statewide voter registration system of what we call an address library. They ingest that data into their system and then present back to us, here are the changes. So we were presented back a list of almost 15,000 addresses that were changing commissioner districts. That's the work that our office is concluding right now. That implementation, I'm going to describe OCVR for you. You'll hear that term quite a bit. The OCVR is the Oregon Centralized Voter Registration System. That word will be used, or that acronym will be used interchangeably with statewide voter registration system. So just to make sure that we're all hearing that information the same. When we received the export back from LCOG and our partners there, we individually went into the voter registration system, or OCVR, and made those changes. The painstaking work there is we're making sure that when we are changing the commissioner districts, we're not undoing any of the work that was concluded last year when we did the main redistricting effort, and that we're able to generate or create the correct unique combination of districts for each registered voter. So we really, I can't express enough the amount of scrutiny that goes into place when we are changing the unique combinations of districts that are associated with every single person. The biggest fear as an election administrator, maybe not the biggest, one of the biggest, is getting a call from a voter and them saying, my neighbor has Commissioner so-and-so on their ballot and I don't have it on my ballot. Then we immediately start researching, is there a geographic boundary in the middle? Okay, yep, actually, you guys live across the street, but you have a different district. But in the event that we made a mistake when we're creating those unique districts, it could lead to something catastrophic. It's individually painstaking work to go in and review and make sure that every single district is unique combination of districts is being created accurately. That's a little bit about the process that we're working through now. And then the next slide, I believe, is Ashley a little bit, and we'll come back a little bit more to some of the other election items.
Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners. Ashley Driscoll, Barry Elsner, and Hammond, and I'm here as a special counsel. I'm going to keep my comments relatively brief today. I'm going to go over some of the legal considerations for the board when making such a decision. So when looking at your legal authority to redistrict, you have two different grants of authority under your charter. The first one is under Section 5, which is your general grant of authority. And the second one is a specific grant of authority under Section 10. And I'm going to briefly touch on what Section 10 provides. So Section 10 provides, Judy went over this really briefly before, but the Board of Commissioners shall, not less than every 10 years, initiate a population review and develop new maps if necessary. The resulting districts cannot deny any person protection of law, equal protection of law, nor can they disqualify any sitting commissioner. On top of that, when redistricting and looking at new maps, the Board of Commission needs to be sure that you are following all the state and federal guidelines that Judy reviewed earlier. So when making this sort of decision, some of the legal considerations the board should take under advisement is whether the review is timely, looking at that not less than every 10 years language, developing an idea of whether or not any new maps are necessary as the charter requires, and then to ensure that you're not denying any voter equal protection of law and ensuring that any resulting new maps comply with state and federal law. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, and thank you, Ashley. And
let's pause for just 1 second. We've received a lot of information. The substantive discussion is going to come at the end of the complete presentation. But do we have any burning questions at this point in time? One sentence question, one sentence answer. Okay? I don't see any at this point in time, other than something that you, Vice Chair Trujillo, go ahead.
Thanks. I think it was Clerk Dawson, you mentioned 15,000 voters were affected. So that's individual voters, not voting households, not addresses?
it was households. Thank you. Addresses. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Ms. Driscoll, I have a quick one for you regarding not disqualify any sitting commissioner. Say that again and explain that.
So I can read from the charter language. It said, no boundary creation, position designation, or boundary change shall disqualify commissioner from completing the term of office for which that commissioner was elected or appointed.
Okay, so that has nothing to do with the re-election of a commissioner inside a particular district, just simply completing the term, even though they may live outside the reformed district.
Exactly.
Right on, thank you.
Thank you. And to continue on with our presentation, the next step we wanted to cover was just some special considerations to keep in mind when making this decision. These fall in the elections wheelhouse, so I'll go ahead and walk through a couple of special considerations. When making a change to commissioner districts, it would require at least a minimum of 4 weeks staff time for election staff to be able to carry out that work. During this period, we would kind of quarantine one election staff member that would be completely dedicated to this work. That 4-week period doesn't include the time that Lane Council of Governments would do in advance of that, taking the map that was selected and creating that in a data export that we could use to compare the differences. Because we have a small election team, we don't necessarily have the resource to make changes to district boundaries during an active election cycle. And for us, when we're talking about an active election cycle, that's 60 days before, which starts this Friday for the May election, and 30 days after. You'll hear us refer to that as E-60, E+30. That's our standard active election cycle. Also, the elections office is migrating to a brand new voter registration and elections management system in July. That means our user acceptance testing is going to begin as soon as we conclude this May election, and it will likely continue through the summer, wrapping up just in time for the November election. So through the entire summer, we'll be working on implementing that new statewide voter registration system. That's an important timeline to consider because we wouldn't be able to do any redistricting work within the new system at that time when we're migrating the system and starting new. That rolls into a little bit of an overview, and Judy has a table that shows if you were to choose to make a change, what a viable option would be. We wouldn't be able to make a change in OCVR, the statewide system, before the May election. As I mentioned, E-60 is this Friday. In addition, for the November election that we're planning, although there might be enough time to prepare with the implementation and migration of the voter registration system, it's very unlikely that redistricting efforts would be able to be concluded by our staff. The next viable option would be if an ordinance was adopted that the elections office in coordination with LCOG could make the differences in advance of the May election when commissioners would be appearing on the ballot. That's the soonest that we'd be able to make any type of redistricting efforts in the voter registration system.
And if I might just add a little bit more clarity on the, and it does walk through in the memo, but just for clarity's sake, and you spoke to it perfectly, but option one is really no change at all. Keep the existing maps as is. And option two is, while it says new map, again, our most viable and immediately available options are those maps presented from the IRC to the board. So of those three, just for clarity.
Thank you, Judy. And just continuing on with impacts that are known to us at this time. I can speak to the costs and the election-specific impacts. At this time, we have spent about $29,000 with to LCOG to support us in this fashion. We do not, the elections office doesn't have a GIS person that was doing the work for us, so we contracted with LCOG for that work. We currently have one staff member that has spent 6 weeks working on just these redistricting efforts. So just to put a cost associated with that. Redistricting efforts will result in the loss of resources for us to conduct other critical work. I know the presidential election might seem far away to many, but we're already planning for that election now, and we had many modernization projects slated for what's considered the downtime that might be a time when redistricting efforts could be concluded. And so we wouldn't be able to do that important work if we were spending those time and those resources on redistricting. There might be some voter confusion. Our office is getting ready to mail out about 15,000 letters to folks who are now having their commissioner districts changed. Some of these folks already had other districts changed earlier in the year for their other unique combination of districts. If there were changes made again, we would be sending another third letter to some folks who may or may not have a commissioner district change again. So we'd want to limit the amount of voter confusion, and our office is, one of the goals of our office is to educate the public when it comes to what's happening with their voter registration record. And I believe you've heard some of this in opening public comments about some of the downstream effects of other districts. Lane County Community College directly followed commissioner boundaries to create their districts. Lane County elections created our precincts based on the current districts. Many other districts followed Lane County's precincts when creating their districts. So if there were changes made to the commissioner districts now, they would no longer follow potentially precinct lines nor district lines. And I mentioned that we have 446 splits or unique combination of districts. In speaking with our support person at LCOG, he would not be surprised if a change could create up to 1,000 splits. A split in that unique combination of districts is a ballot style. So every single ballot style that's created is a new set of ballots to be proved. It increases the opportunity for risk. And when it comes to elections, my biggest concern, I want to eliminate all risk whenever possible. But those are known impacts that could be created because of the way that redistricting occurs when changes are made and there's downstream effects where we're all kind of working together and waiting to get those districts, and then we're taking action based on that. We want to limit the number of splits to increase efficiency in the election process, and there is an opportunity for multiple splits to be created if we were to change district boundaries.
Our last summary slide is really, in response to the board request, there's those two kind of viable options and most immediately available. Option one, no change. Option two, a new map from the 3 maps presented by the IRC. So just some kind of reminders, factors to note. to consider elections. I think, hearing from the clerk around workload and time, the inability to do some of that work around modernization, the process, so making any significant change outside of what is perceived as a normal process, additional splits as a potential there, voter confusion, and I think, we've heard both sides of that too, is what I've heard of, just a change in what people are already hearing. So they're getting letters right now of what that change is, and being, having that confusion over my commissioner has changed, or what has changed in that current 2011 map to currently. Also potential voter confusion for an additional change as well. And then cost, finally, just that has been spoken to. So really just another IGA, an intergovernmental agreement with LCOG, who does some of that GIS work, around about $30,000, around 160 hours of elections time, any additional cost in letters to voters that are affected. And so that's what we have in summary for you. We're happy to turn it over for questions. We don't have a recommendation for you, so it's just kind of those two options. Again, no further action with option one, and if there is interest in an option two, the memo spells out some of those timeframes of starting an ordinance process by October in order to meet the deadlines for November for that May 2024 election. So thank you for your time, and I'll turn it over to you, Chair, for any questions.
Thank you. I have a few questions, and if you've followed the meetings, that I generally have the board ask questions. That way I don't have to ask mine, because they usually ask the questions for me. But I have a couple of really overarching issues. Can you go back to the map that showed the charter district definitions? That's the definitions. Now, can you go back to the map that shows it was the chart that showed the names of the districts? Yet it was showing the population split, the two population split charts. And the names of these districts, where did those names come from? Are they out of the charter?
Yes, that is.
So
numbers.
it's, the districts are called West Lane, Springfield, Eugene South, Eugene North, and East Lane, right? Okay. And the definitions are fairly clear in the charter. There's a little bit of vagueness there, but really it says we've got North Eugene, we've got South Eugene, we've got East Lane, we've got West Lane, we've got Springfield, generally. Okay, all right. I may have some questions about that, because I'm pretty confused by some of the thought process that went into that. So there are two issues here. One is the process that we came to the conclusion that was used to get us to the conclusion, and the product that was delivered through the process. So I have some questions on that. My other quick question is regarding the 10 members that were selected by the 5. We had a blind selection of 5 with some things redacted. I knew who I was selecting. I think everybody did. But that being said, when those 5 picked the next 10, how were those applications redacted?
Thank you, Chair and Commissioners. Through that same process, so we did not alter the application. So of the 50 that we received originally, that all commissioners got for their districts, we did talk with the board about how best to redact, knowing that it may not be perfect, but to try and to get at that blind process that's outlined in lane code. So that is, the 5 chose the final 10 plus 3 alternates in that same fashion with redacted applications.
Perfect. Then, so the redactions were as prescribed, and they were the same redactions that the board used. And the board was Bernie, Buck, Farr, Trieger, and Bozovich. So those 5, myself being one of them, selected one member of the board, and the 5 members that those 5 commissioners selected chose the remaining 10. Good. I'll come back to that. Thank you. Questions and comments from the board? If there's no queue, then presentation's over. Thank you.
I'd like to go last if I could, please.
Okay.
Chair.
Then if nobody's willing to go first, I'm going to take it in right to left order. So is anybody wishing to be the first to speak? You'll all have multiple chances to speak.
I'll go ahead, Chair.
And we'll begin with Commissioner Seneca.
Yeah, I can just say that the new map is somewhat frustrating. Someone mentioned this morning that they were proud of the map they put out. I can tell you from the meeting last night, I was with ARCO, River Road Community Organization. They were not proud of that map. They didn't know why they were with a rural commissioner now. They are North Eugene, and they're very proud to be North Eugene. I watched a basketball game the other day, Junction City versus North Eugene, two schools. The North Eugene school is in West Lane. It's not in the North Eugene district. There's just things like this that are obviously could have been fixed had the map been chosen that moved the fewest amount of people. I think the chair on the IRC said it best. She said it's contentious with people that get moved. Move the fewest amount of people. You have the fewest problems. Thank you.
Thank you. And the first round, Commissioner Seneca, Vice Chair Trieger.
Sure, I'll just ask, I want to note, I understand the names of the districts, but the district numbers are also on that chart. And the names, as it's described in the charter, I don't think we've strayed from what it says in the charter, which is name of district is, quote, generally comprised of, not exclusively or specifically. And I think this map still meets that description. I have a couple of questions. I know in the past, this board was actually, everyone was elected at large. We didn't have districts. We also used to have 3 commissioners, and now we have 5. So things do change. Like with many projects that we undertake that involve change is hard. And it takes some time to adapt. And I often think of things, you know, our roles, right? We represent a district, but once we're here, we're making decisions on behalf of the entire county. And whatever our district is an opportunity to get to know it. We've all had some changes to our districts. And likely there will be other changes in the future simply because of how population growth happens, the conversation we just had about housing and expanding housing stock in some of the outlying communities. The way population grows shifts, and the fundamental reason for districting is apportionment, is to have fair and equal representation in terms of number of voting households, and to arrive at that within boundaries such as major highways and rivers and mountains, and then communities of interest such as school districts and so on. So again, I think this map, I mean, we know clearly this map passes all the legal muster and all the intention of the charter. I'm curious, a couple of questions. One, have we ever, to the knowledge of anyone on the panel, adopted a map outside of a 10-year timeline and specifically responsive to census data and apportionment?
I am not aware of that particular, but I have not done that history either.
Great, thank you. I think, I'm just looking at some of my notes to see if, I think for this round, that's probably good for me.
Then I'll keep this hierarchical, and I'll ask a couple of quick questions regarding school districts. So you stated a couple of times trying to keep Bethel district intact, and one weakness was it split the Bethel district. And now, how many high schools are there in 4J? Anybody know that? There are five high schools in 4J. 5, is that right? No, it's South, North, Sheldon, and Churchill. And which districts are there in now? So this is District 4J. North Eugene is in West Lane. South Eugene is in South Eugene. Sheldon is in North Eugene, and Churchill is in East Lane. 4 high schools, 4 different districts. So clearly, anybody who used that as a particular criterion, school district boundaries, that's kind of a red herring criterion. Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. In this round, I just have 2 points I want to make. You did bring out the district name issue, and that's actually an issue for East Lane too. In District 5, East Lane is only a portion of District 5. I have north of Eugene, east, so North Lane, East Lane, South Lane, and West Lane. All of it is in District 5. We had, I think prior to our new commissioners coming on board, we did have a professional come from PSU to chat about redistricting in general. And one of the points he made is normally those descriptors are not part of district formation names anymore. And for my district, that actually makes a lot of sense. Because regardless of how you try to describe some, it will never really truly describe District 5. So I just wanted to point that out since you brought it up, Chair. The other question that I want to ask is, you do put in here several issues regarding what the cost would be if the board was interested in moving forward, but one of them was not the cost of litigation. What do we expect the cost of any potential litigation to be?
Commissioner Buck, at this point, it would just be a guesstimate, so I would not be able to give you an answer regarding if somebody would bring a challenge, what that challenge would look like, or the expense of defense. But as always, legal defense has the possibility of being very expensive, determining if you take the litigation in-house or use out-of-house counsel can definitely escalate those costs as well.
Thank you. That's all for now.
Thank you. Commissioner Lovell.
Thank you, Chair. Means we're on round 1. I think I'll limit my comments a little bit and save the cannon for later. First of all, this is my mess, and so I own it. I was the first one to bring this up at the first meeting because I feel like I watched the whole process go down last year. As you know, I was elected last May to replace the person who sat in this chair, so I was very interested in what was going on and kept track of it very closely. So when you refer to us as the new commissioners, somehow it has a feeling that maybe we don't know what was going on. Well, we knew exactly what was going on and watched the whole thing. So I just want to make that clear. But also, I want to make sure that I commend you for the time and thoroughness that you all spent on this. The question that I rose in the first meeting was just simply, hey, what does it look like if we just took another look at the maps? It wasn't, hey, what does it look like if we break the wagon wheel and make up the whole Oregon Trail again, which is what came back to us. So the thoroughness, commendable, and I honor your time because time is slices of life we give away. We don't get that time back. And so I thoroughly honor and appreciate the time that you spent on all of this. And so I don't want to diminish that in the slightest. I do want to point out that in this particular case, we keep going around certain state mandates and the things that the state and the county and the charters recommend that we do. But always there's a few angles of seeing things. And I think for us to be labeled, or myself to be labeled as someone who's trying to disrupt democracy, I'm not trying to disrupt that at all. There's no personal gain here. I was proudly elected to be a commissioner of Lane County, which I am honored to do, but the citizens of Springfield elected me. The priorities of Springfield and the political ideologies and visions and the things that Springfield does elected me. And so those are the things that when we look at the state charters where it says that the state will not divide communities of common interest, I hold that interest in the highest regard, because if we dilute those interests, as in this email I got here from the League of Women's Voters, who says that the goal of equal representation necessarily produces a map that has some part of the city of Eugene in each commission district. So to me, that is probably the biggest reason for us to take a look at this again, because if we're looking at the dilution of Eugene and Eugene's current ideologies that they're swirling around influencing Springfield, That concerns me. I sit on Main Street all the time and have dinner because I have a kitchen, but it's solely for resale at my house. So I see people coming down there all the time saying, my gosh, Springfield has got it together. I love what they're doing. And people suggest to me as a commissioner to make merchandise that says Springfield, we're not Eugene. So to me, that speaks volumes of the state mandate of not divide communities of common interest. And in the interest of not dividing that, I think there's another map without reinventing the wheel that would certainly support that in a better way. And that's what I'll say on this round.
Thank you. And you all feel okay about going through the same process for the second round, or do we want to, okay, we'll go through the same process. And Commissioner Senega? And I may not have anything to say in the second round, so don't feel like you have to say something. So.
Phew, because I'm good.
Okay, Commissioner Trieger, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, just, I appreciate Commissioner Buck mentioning about the names. I face that as well. People, I mean, we all know people often don't know what is county commissioner or as city councilor. Clearly, right, Commissioner Lovall very identified with Springfield, which is actually a city municipality, but predominantly, what was the language I just read out, generally comprised of Springfield Metro. I do not refer to my district as South Eugene because that is a neighborhood, and my district is actually comprised of about 8 different neighborhoods because South Eugene is a neighborhood, and there's, people think of South Lane as Crestwell and Cottage Grove, which is actually the East Lane Commissioner District. So I think it's an important point to bring up that it adds to voter confusion and is really imprecise to get wedded to geographic names rather than our district numbers, because city councilors identify as ward numbers, House districts and Senate districts identify as their numbers. So thanks for pointing that out. It reminded me, I face that confusion in my district as well. I think the only other thing for this round is we've talked about the language community of common interest, and that has a very specific definition when it comes to apportionment and elections and districting. Can you speak to that at all, Clerk Dawson, about what communities, I know what my understanding of communities of common interest means in this realm, but if you have anything to offer, I'd love to hear it.
I think as a new resident of Lane County, the piece that I would be able to add to it is when I just went through redistricting, I was the director of elections in the city and county of Denver. And we built our precincts there as well around communities of common interest. And so in those same efforts, we were trying to group neighborhood organizations together or with the interest of the community. So it seems like, although I wasn't here for the redistricting efforts in Lane County at the time, that it is similar grouping of communities of interest or groups of interest, but not being here at the time and not being familiar with the process that I inherited. I'm sorry, I can't speak to more to that. And if I could add really quickly, I wanted to just state on the record that I said hello to the new commissioners just because I haven't had the pleasure of being in front of you yet. And that was just me being here to be in front of you and had nothing to do with this. And I just wanted to put that on the record. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot with the question. I just wanted to make sure I got the more expert voice if you had some language. I'm trying to remember where I pulled this language from, but I know it is about not diluting voting strength, particularly when it comes to ethnic minority or language specificity and so on, is the intent of that language around voter disenfranchisement, that communities of common interest generally, it can mean school districts, but it can also, and very importantly, mean not diluting the voting strength of particular, for instance, racial or ethnic minorities or groups that speak a language other than English, is my understanding from reading laws about redistricting. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. And I'm continuing to listen to the discussion. But I'm back at 4J again. I don't know why I keep dwelling on this, but to me, was I the first person that noticed that 4J had high schools in 4 of the 5 districts in the new alignment? Did anybody ever notice that? That seems to me, I don't know, we've got a whole bunch of stuff in here on not separating Bethel District, which is Willamette High School and Kalapuya High School. And Geographically, it's strewn. Irving Elementary is in Santa Clara. And Alvador is well out to the west. It's a partially a rural district. Mostly, all the schools are inside the urban growth boundary, but it's in no small part geographically an urban district. So we spent a lot of time looking at Bethel, but didn't seem to spend even one moment of time considering 4J. Am I missing something there?
Chair Farr and Commissioners, I think what was presented to you today was a highlight of some of the strengths and weaknesses spelled out by the committee members themselves for those 3 maps. I would tell you, and without going back through the notes, there was a lot of conversations around 4J and all of the school districts. We did do an overlay zone of school districts on the maps themselves, and so my thought is it's going back to that balancing question of there may not be that perfect solution, but trying to identify where you might be making some changes if you do move a line. But I believe all of the school districts were in discussion throughout.
Thanks, Judy. I'm not grilling here, but and I apologize if it feels that I am, because that's not what I'm trying to do, but I'm trying to think about this. We present, the splitting of Bethel School District was presented as a weakness in that map, but it didn't present 4J high schools in 4 different districts as a weakness in that map. Okay, Commissioner Buck.
I will note that I live in an unincorporated Lane County, but we're in the 4J district. It's their only rural community schools in that area. So it happens outside the city limits. It's just a note from what you're saying.
That wasn't anything to do with my point, so.
What I'm hearing most from concerned board members really is more about the process that we went through. And if there are issues with the process, I am fully open to discussing those issues going forward, so the next time around, it meets everybody's expectations and desires for a full process. And I'm not talking about the process that you went through, Judy. I think we did more than what we've ever done before as a board. But it sounds like there are still some particular issues in that process that perhaps need to be talked about in a larger setting, so that next time around, this, we don't have so much frustration around it. But the fact is, right now, the board originally voted on our current maps nearly a year and a half ago. The fact is, there's been no other population count since then. There's been no new census. I'm not hearing any other normal, justifiable redistricting trigger that would occur for us to currently consider redistricting again. It sounds like it's more about process issues. And I want to recognize that. And if that's not the issue, I'd really like to hear about that from other commissioners. The fact is that the maps have changed. They are what they are now. And there's a lot of, I can hear the frustration. But there's huge liability involved at this point if we were to move forward from here in the direction of switching maps. And that really concerns me. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. Commissioner Lovell.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Buck, for your comments about process. I don't have a problem with the process. I think, like Judy and everyone on the table has identified the process as being very thorough. I think that the process was a little flawed along the way, and I think the outcome was a little flawed. And if we can throw up map J one more time again, just so that there's a visual to my next set of comments, I think would be great, and kind of zoom in on the middle of that just a little bit. If you look at North Eugene, it looks like District 1 kind of rammed a stake kind of right in the middle of it and split it. And if we're looking at, like I said, again, the state mandates of not dividing communities of common interest, that to me is kind of a glaring geographic and cartography kind of view of that. Also, District 2 is kind of divided up. And let me just say this. The current map J on the surface looks like it accomplishes the desired goals of being contiguous and geographic and linked to transportation, and it got within 1% of the population counts. But if your previous slide is accurate as well, every map served those 5 boundaries, including the 1% population counts. But the glaring and obvious flaw, again, is that in every district, there's a large chunk of Eugene influencing the interests of that district. And that's what I question as an incoming commissioner and one that watched this process unfold all year round. You've got different ideologies, and Springfield alone is injected with over 1,000 new voters who are primarily focused on the interests and issues of South Eugene. And the reason I know that is because I attended a neighborhood meeting there and talked to those people. And I was excited to talk to them. I was excited to be introduced as the new county commissioner, wanted to come to their neighborhood meeting. And the thing I was most excited about is, hey, what kind of interest do you have in Springfield? How do you feel Springfield's coming about? Are you excited about downtown as I am? And they looked at me like I had 4 heads. And what they talked to me about was what they wanted was a basketball hoop and dog parks, which is great stuff. I loved basketball hoops and dog parks, but Springfield's focus is about economic redevelopment. Springfield's focus is about revitalizing their downtown and Thurston and Mohawk. Springfield's focus is to create more affordable housing and jobs and maintaining the timber industry. Very different than what I experienced at that meeting. And so that's kind of what raised my curiosity about this process. Again, I don't want to reinvent the wheel here. I don't want to go back to the drawing board and get another committee, but I do want to say this. There's many comments I've heard about the county's independent redistricting committee, specifically about the structure of the IRC and how it wasn't really independent at all when its selections were first rooted in the selections of county commissioners. Now, hey, I'm going to pick somebody I like. I'm going to pick somebody that has my ideologies and my focus. That's my first pick. And I would hope that first pick would pick like-minded people as he was picked. So here we have 5 commissioners picking 5 people that are aligned ideologically and politically with their own agendas, and they're going to pick 5 more people doing the same. I scratch my head and I go, that doesn't sound very independent to me. That sounds kind of focused. Independent to me would be like, we get 100 applicants, we put them in a fishbowl and we draw out names. That would be independent to me. Because then you wouldn't know what you'd get, but you'd certainly get a random sampling of people. That, to me, would be more transparent, honest, than looking at redacted names of people whose just their names are scratched out, but in the description it says they were a Eugene mayor once. Well, that leaves 2 living people in the county. Pretty tough to pick out who that is, I'm sure. But then you have this. The optics are that if those 10 were chosen based on sanitized applications with their names blacked out, but the subsequent content revealed who they were, that doesn't sound to me as very, very transparent. So I don't know, maybe it's just me, so help me out here. I'm just kind of telling what I think. Because the structure was approved by a previous board, there were several problems that I saw during the process. And I just want to also state for the record that I don't bear responsibility as a new commissioner for the decisions a previous board made. If they were flawed, I'm elected here to fix them. If they were wrong, I'm elected here to make them right. I don't care what the cost is. The cost to the county of doing what is wrong overall is not worth the cost of me bearing this office for. So I just want to put that up. There's some structural problems about the previous board and what there was going on. There was multiple people on the IRC who had received financial benefit from commissioners or campaigns for their office within the past 5 years. That was a known fact, and that kind of rubbed me, didn't pass the smell test for me. There was a handful of public employees and elected officials on the IRC. There was lobbyists, known lobbyists on the IRC. There was a local political contributor of significant amounts on the IRC. And there was a married couple on the IRC, which the wife was picked after the husband was picked by a commissioner. I almost have to laugh. That just sounds to me not very independent or very random. So the Independent Redistricting Committee on its merits is a great idea. I love the idea. But it's got to be a body separate from the legislative body. It's got to be a body that has the true independent redistricting ideals at its core, not rooted or strung on people that we know who know people who know people. So I think that process is a little flawed. And like I said before, this is round 2, and I'm all about not reinventing the wheel, making things simpler, but I do think we have an opportunity to make things right. And I understand the legal challenges, I understand all the things, and all of the fears that I'm sensing that's put forth about all the reasons why we shouldn't do this, they don't bear with me, because doing the right thing is always the hardest thing. So I think that's what we should do going forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. And we'll abandon and go to more of a scattergun approach. And Commissioner Buck.
Thank you, Chair. You brought up a couple of issues I wanted to bring up. The first issue you brought up was part of going to a different neighborhood of your district. That wasn't Springfield. My district is made up of a huge variety of communities. I think rural districts in general are, but all districts have more than one community. It would be a luxury for a rural commissioner to have to only be focused on one community. That's not what we have here. We have vast different communities in rural districts, and you have to be responsive to each and every one of them. And some are going to lean your way politically, and some are definitely not. You have to be able to be compatible and work with all different kinds of people in your community. You're not going to be able to just choose which cities and which smaller communities you can work with. That's not the reason we even created the IRC. The point was that electeds aren't the ones that should be choosing their districts. It should be representative of the people that we're serving that are the ones that can come together and determine our districts for them. We wanted that arm's length distance. We are simply not going to be able to choose which communities are going to be part of our districts if we do it right and we do it the way in which people really want to see their people elected. The other point I wanted to bring was, you know, I did mention in the last comment that I think it's about process issues. And even though you said you thought the process was good, you ended with process issues. The way the committees was formed, the people that were chosen, those details are really process questions.
I'm going to ask that we maintain our comments to the general audience and not to one another at the
That's fine.
table.
Yeah. I just want to at least address those issues. I do want it to be personal when we talk up here sometimes, so I don't want it to feel that I am picking on particular issues, but there are legitimate things that people say that there are legitimate responses for. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Buck. I think we're close to the end of the discussion time on this. I'm looking around, I don't see any further hands raised. But you know, I'm going to say that I agree with what seems to be the general discussion here. And the general discussion is that when we redistrict next time for permanent redistricting, then we need to look at the process and make certain that it is something that really is, it takes a little bit more time and a little bit more public input than the listening sessions that we had, which really didn't produce, in my estimation, a very balanced, independent review committee. It didn't, you know, and I think Commissioner Lovall cited some reasons, and it's difficult to disagree with the things that he cited. It's difficult for anyone to disagree with the things that he cited. It did happen. It's where we are. They gave us 3 maps. We chose from the board majority, picked one of the 3 maps. It wasn't my choice. But we're at a point right now where you're asking us, do we want option 1, no change, or option 2? This is precipitation. This is rain coming down right now. Or option 2, do we want to consider a new map? So to the Board of County Commissioners, how do you want to proceed from here? The option is option 1, no change, option 2, new map, and I can lay out my preference if you prefer to hear that. May precipitate the final decision here. My option is no change. And I can cite the reasons for that, and the reasons are many. Very few of the reasons that have been presented today. Today's discussion didn't, in fact, today's discussion kind of sent me the other direction a little bit. I apologize for that. But my preference of the options that you offer is at this point in time, no change in the districts as they have been realigned. So, discussion. If there's no further discussion on that, then my word is the last word. Seems to be. And thank you for your presentation. Thank you all for attending, and keep an eye on it, because no change today doesn't mean that we aren't going to continue to discuss it, because I'm not going to go into any further details. I have to explain to a person who sometimes can talk to me and I can't talk back because he's my dentist and he's looking in my mouth. Why are you not my commissioner anymore? Well, anyway, that's probably the answer I'll give. So at this point, thank you for the presentation. This is not an exhausted subject. It's not something clearly that is without opinions, both at this table, in the staff, in our current audience, but more in the general population of Lane County. I currently represent Franklin, and I don't represent North Eugene High School. Kind of weird. But anyway, we'll hear from folks who also think some of those things may be weird. So, Ms. Mokrzycki, that concludes this item on today's agenda. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you, panel.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, as the room reconfigures, we'll move along to item D. Mr. Mokrzycki, do you have any announcements?
Well, we just so happen to have the county clerk here, and since it is E-63, which means what? 63 days until the May election, I thought it'd be great to give an elections update. I will be prepared to do this as we go forward over the next several weeks and months, but since we have Dina here, I thought it'd be great for all of you, particularly the new commissioners who haven't had the ability to hear from our relatively new county clerk, who's done some really outstanding work in just the first 7 or 8 months on the job and continues to do that to enhance transparency and accessibility and knowledge and understanding about our elections here in Lane County. So, Dina.
Thank you so much, Chair Farr, committee. I'm really pleased to be back to talk about election stuff, which I absolutely love. Again, it's E-63, and so we'll do a weekly presentation, or I'll provide materials for Mr. Mokrzycki to be able to share. I just wanted to start out by sharing that we've overhauled the elections website, and I think that's pretty important to all of the constituents of Lane County. We're working to make it a more intuitive process. So voters will be greeted now by 18 separate accordion folders that are full of information, and we're working within the constraints of the current system that we have, our website system, and so there's a lot of information that we're trying to present. So we've changed the focus to be more of a question-based. So if you are visiting our website, there's lots of questions that voters usually will ask, and so we've presented those in an accordion fashion that you can open it up and see lots of information. But I'm really excited about the transparency piece, which is really key to me, and something that we're very excited to be able to roll out already. We have a tentative schedule of events that are available for ballot processing so that anyone can come and observe the process. So voters are greeted with the accordion files, and then additionally there are several quick links that are available. We've got all of the drop boxes for the May election are already visible with just the click of a button. An icon will lead you to see where all 21 drop boxes are. A click of the button now will show you where the results posting schedule is. That's available already for the upcoming election. And additionally, we have a quick link that takes you directly to the election. So I'm really excited about the changes, and I hope that there are, our voters are equally as impressed. The transparency piece, a live streaming, we will be going live as soon as we deliver ballots to drop boxes, April 27th. But so folks are, will have a really in-depth opportunity to watch the process in person, and we've provided an election security overview on our website now as well that really goes down into the weeds about chain of custody and controls and things of that nature. But just a couple of very quick updates of what's coming up. Candidate filing ends this Thursday. So far, of the 208 positions that are available, 172 filings as of yesterday. And so we're anticipating kind of a mad rush on 5 o'clock on Thursday when we finish accepting those candidate statements. Beginning on Friday, we'll be building and laying out the ballots. So Thursday, 5 p.m. deadline for everyone to file. We'll start vetting all those names, proofing and creating the ballots. The team will work over the weekend to actually start laying out the artwork. We do that internally. And so really in earnest, the process starts this weekend of creating the ballots. Monday, March 20th is the deadline for candidate statements, endorsements, and arguments for the voters pamphlet. As you'll know, we are doing a Lane County voters pamphlet this May, and moving forward in odd year elections, we'll be doing those. So voters can expect to receive a voters pamphlet a few days in advance of when they receive their ballots. The voters pamphlet will be, most of the materials in the voters pamphlet will also be translated into 5 languages, and we'll be providing a link for voters to be able to link to those languages. This was due to a law change. The Secretary of State's office is doing that translation for us, so we're very excited to be able to provide that. We will be mailing military and overseas ballots March 31st, so just in a few weeks, ballots will be going out the door. And again, drop boxes open April 27th. That's the day that we're also mailing ballots. That's the day the live streaming starts as well. So last year we didn't have that many folks taking too much of an opportunity of watching the live streaming. Most of the time it was me watching. But if anyone ever, our office is open for in-person observation as well. So that tentative schedule of events is there so that folks can look online and see what's happening today at the elections office, and they can come down and observe the process. One item of note that is another big project the elections office is currently working on is the fossil fuel petitions for the city of Eugene. The city clerk filed those with us on Thursday, and we are in the process of verifying signatures for their petition. They're hoping to, if that's found sufficient, they'll be on the November ballot. But I wanted to share that because we're in doing candidate filing right now, voter pamphlet creation, and also verifying those signatures. So I just thought it was a great opportunity to highlight the work that the elections team is doing and still maintaining the voter registration system and overhauling the website. So that's the update for this week.
Anything about Row River and Pleasant Hill?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that. Our office is working with a group of internal stakeholders on a special district formation. We're overhauling that process as well. So we have been working, I've been working very closely with Chief Smith from Pleasant Hill and Goshen, and also with Walt from Row River, and so we are really working to be able to provide some solid assistance and step-by-step processes. And so we do have one petition for the district formation of Pleasant Hill that is also currently being circulated to form a new combined district. So that's a little bit of the additional work that the office is doing. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks.
Pardon me, Ms. Mokryski, I want to say that I've been really personally quite positively impressed by the way you describe your job, the way you describe the work, and the way you have handled the multiple issues that you've been faced with. And you've been on the job this long already.
Thank you so much.
And you can see this is not a uncomplex place to work and live. But I think we have a good machinery, right?
Yeah,
Good.
yes, you can be assured of that.
And you get Voodoo Donuts the day after the election.
That's true.
I missed you when I delivered this last time, but they came.
That's a little bit of a busy day for us, but the staff greatly appreciated them, and I was able to grab one after the fact as well.
Hear it. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Commissioner Buck.
I would just like to commend you for all the work you're doing on the special districts.
Thank you.
It was kind of an afterthought here today, but since you mentioned it, there's a lot that goes into forming these special districts or reforming them, as in one of the cases. And we really haven't had a process for that before. And so you're basically blazing a new trail for special districts now and potentially into the future. And you work really well with the residences and the agencies, and they appreciate it. So thank you very much. And I can definitely feel your touch in modernization of the whole elections department. I appreciate that work.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Chair?
Excellent, thank you. Commissioner Senega.
Just real quick, I would also like to thank you for taking care of our rural communities. And there's a lot of questions out there around drop boxes and stuff like that, and it sounds like we are on the correct path. So appreciate it. Secondly, maybe we'll look into getting you a hobby if you're sitting there watching YouTube of the ballot boxes. Thank you, Dina. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for that part of your, oh, we're still going.
Yeah, no, this is not going to be an in-depth comment at all. But Dina, I haven't been around a lot of county clerks, but your enthusiasm's contagious. So I appreciate that. When you first mentioned that the people are going to be greeted by the accordion files, I didn't know if that was a band. And I was thinking, wow, this lady's really got something going. And
They
I really
played at my
appreciate-
wedding.
Yeah, exactly, right? And then the other thing about, you kind of lamenting that, live stream viewership is down, I would maybe suggest a title change. Viewing it on Netflix is maybe an action and adventure, might pick up viewership. But no, I think you're doing a great job. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, Ms. Moran.
She is a music fan, so if you want to talk Radiohead or any get deep on music theory and nerd out in that, in addition to elections, Dina would be great for that.
Beatles, Who, Led Zeppelin, Rolling Stones, and Pink Floyd.
That's all you need.
I also just love that you call it artwork,
Oh,
laying out the back.
Yeah.
I did too.
thank you all so much.
So Dina is a gem. Thank you for allowing that time for her, and our goal is to keep her doing the great work she is with her team. The other thing I wanted to share with commissioners, in addition, the budget work that we're doing currently, on this Thursday evening, we have a financial wellness fair, and we've been doing this for, gosh, it feels like about 4 years now. We do a financial wellness fair. You're all invited. It's for all of our employees and family members of employees. We will have a PERS representative. It's done virtually. We'll have a PERS representative, Mission Square Retirement, that is our 529 and 401A, no, I'm sorry, 457, our 457 and 401A retirement plans that our employees participate in, as well as Dev Northwest for additional financial literacy and training and skill building. So we do that in addition to our annual health fair for our employees, where we provide, flu shots and access to behavioral health services and knowledge information about our wellness clinic, the Live Well Center, to focus on the physical and mental well-being of our employees. And then we also wanted to do these annual financial wellness fairs to help make sure that our employees and their families are have all the tools necessary to be financially well in their lives, both now and into retirement. So that is 5 p.m. to 8:30 this Thursday, and if you and anyone in your family is interested, that's available. So that's what I have right now, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Mokraski. Any further questions or comments? I have none either, so we'll move down the agenda to Commissioner Business with item A is announcements. Do we have any announcements? We kind of got announcements in throughout the day.
Springfield girls basketball won state championship. Come on.
Is there an echo in here? I heard that over.
I know. I just playing the drum again.
Willamette High School took third place in the statewide culinary arts contest. And, if I'd been there, they'd have won. No, that's not true. Okay.
Junction City High School took third in basketball this weekend. We were up in Portland. We watched that. Took the family up there.
Excellent.
It's a fun time.
You have a soccer story for us, Commissioner Trigger? No soccer stories. They typically do. You and I never cease to talk soccer about whether it's assistant refereeing or whatever it may be. All right, that's enough of that. Do we have any future board assignment requests? Thank you, Vice Chair Trigger.
Thank you, Chair. I have two. One is just to make it official, the FSIT, the frequency change of FSIT, because initially they came to us quarterly because of a board assignment. So I just want to get head nods to make it official that we are adjusting those report backs to twice a year in person and twice a year as a written report. Thank you. And then the other, from some conversation earlier, I would like to get head nods to request that we get an update from staff on the status of work to consider the Glenwood Transfer Station, to specifically include strategies for customer engagement about the use of that site or other potential sites were we to relocate the transfer station, and then cost estimates for relocation versus renovation or retrofits of the current site. And then, of course, that report back can also include anything else staff wants us to know in our continued examination of best use of that property and location for our transfer station.
I think we all kind of shook our heads up and down on that one earlier. And I'd like to see if that does overlap somewhat with a previous agenda item request, which may have been exhausted by this point. It was, Ms. Mokrajewski, when we were responding in no small way to the indoor track committee, and that we got asked, what would it take to move the Glenwood transfer site? Just ask for a short report back. So this probably piggybacks on that and makes it a little bit more in detail report back.
Thank you. Yeah, I did look through the pending open assignments and didn't see anything specifically related to the site and the operations there, so.
Perfect. Any further agenda? Yes, Commissioner
I was
Sanders.
going to ask, does that add what it would take to get the Glenwood site up to speed as far as any deferred maintenance and such? Is that?
Yeah, that's the sort of renovation or
okay.
retrofitting needed or cost of relocation, yeah.
Got it.
So we're good to go on that request. Any further assignment requests? Then we have no further ones, which brings us to a review of assignments, Mr. Mokrajewski.
So just those two, the one to reflect that the FSIT reports will happen twice a year in person and twice a year with written reports, and then two, that staff do an update on the Glenwood site relocation, including customer engagement and cost estimates.
Thank you. Any adjustments to that? Very good. Then we'll move down the agenda to item 14. Now, we do have an executive session that has been scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. So I'm going to read us into that executive session this evening. We do have other business on today's agenda. I'll defer that other business potentially to the end of the meeting tomorrow.
Chair, I just want to check on that to make sure. I was thinking that possibly, because I believe that the board was going to be in person for the executive session at 9, but I'm checking with Diana Jones to see if we were going to meet here in Harris Hall at 9, and you would read into the exec session there, and then we go up to the BCC.
We're going to read in here for tomorrow, no?
The last
Hi.
word, Diana,
It's Diana.
please. Thank you.
Please.
Sorry for jumping in. If he can read in now, that would be great, and then we will just begin an executive session in the BCC at 9 a.m.
Okay. We were going back and forth on what needed to happen to accomplish the technical challenges with that, so you had it right, Chair.
Very good. Then I do have the language to read us into the executive session for tomorrow morning. So at the sound of my gavel, we will be adjourned as the Board of County Commissioners, and we will reconvene in executive session in the Board of County Commissioners conference room at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. The Board of Commissioners will meet in executive session to review and evaluate the employment-related performance of the Chief Executive Officer of any public body, a public officer, employee, or staff member who does not request an open hearing. This executive session is held pursuant to ORS 192.6602I, which allows the Board of Commissioners to meet in executive session for the purposes listed. Representatives of the news media and designated staff shall be allowed to attend the executive session. All other members of the audience are asked to leave the room. Representatives of the news media are specifically directed not to report on any of the deliberations during the executive session, except to state the general subject of the session as previously announced. No decision may be made in executive session. We reserve the right to come back out into public session should the need arise.